Hello everyone, and welcome back to another journey into the deepest mysteries of the galaxy, far, far away. If this is your first time joining us, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more epic Star Wars content that will take you to the very edges of known space and beyond. Tonight we embark on something truly extraordinary. For over 2.5 hours, we will traverse 25,000 years of galactic history, uncovering secrets so profound that even the Jedi archives have buried them in their deepest vaults. This is the complete timeline of the Sith, but not the sanitized version you think you know. This is the true chronicle, the one that reveals how a single ancient consciousness has manipulated every major galactic event since the dawn of civilization itself. Deep beneath the surface of a dead world called Nathema, in a chamber that exists partially outside of normal space and time, something stirs. The walls are covered in hieroglyphs that predate any known civilization, glowing faintly with an energy that makes reality itself seem fragile. In the center of this impossible room stands a throne carved from a single massive crystal, and upon that throne sits a figure whose very presence bends the force around him like light around a black hole. His eyes open. They are not the yellow of a typical Sith Lord, but something far more disturbing. They are the color of dying stars, ancient beyond measure, containing the memories of 1,000 different faces he has worn across the millennia. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of every world he has consumed, every civilization he has manipulated into destroying itself for his entertainment. The final piece moves into position, he whispers, and his words seem to echo not just through the chamber but through hyperspace itself, reaching across impossible distances to touch the minds of beings who have never heard his name. 25,000 years of preparation. Every war, every tragedy, every hero's sacrifice has led to this moment. The Skywalker girl thinks she has won, but she has merely opened the door to my true awakening. The figure rises from his throne, and as he does, the very fabric of space around him begins to tear. Through these rifts, we catch glimpses of other realities, other galaxies, where his influence has already taken hold. They call me by many names: Tenebrae, Vitiate, Valkorion, the Sith Emperor. But I am older than their oldest nightmares, more patient than time itself. He reaches out toward a massive holographic display showing the entire galaxy, and where his fingers touch, entire star systems begin to dim and fade. Every Sith Lord who ever lived served my will, though most never knew it. Every Jedi who fell to the dark side fed power into my eternal design. But then, something unexpected happens. Another voice cuts through his cosmic monologue, ancient and powerful but somehow different. Your story will be told, devourer of worlds, but not as you would wish it. The truth has a way of surviving even your manipulations. The Dark Emperor's expression changes, surprise flickering across features that have not shown genuine emotion in millennia. Impossible. I consumed all who might oppose me. Not all, the voice replies. Some truths are too important to die. Your chronicle will be preserved as warning, not celebration. These are the mysteries we will uncover together as we journey through the complete timeline of the Sith and discover how every moment of triumph and tragedy has been carefully orchestrated by a consciousness so vast and patient that it makes God seem small by comparison. In the deepest levels of Coruscant, far beneath the gleaming spires and endless traffic streams, lies a chamber that has existed since before the Republic's founding. Here, in a vault sealed by both technology and the Force itself, ancient knowledge waits in eternal silence. The walls are lined with crystalline matrices that pulse with a soft blue light, each one containing memories spanning millennia. This is where our journey truly begins, in the presence of the ancient archivist. I am that chronicler, bound by powers older than the Jedi Order to record and preserve the complete truth of galactic history. For 25,000 years, I have watched civilizations rise and fall, witnessed the birth of legends and the death of gods. My existence spans the ages not by choice, but by necessity. Someone must remember. Someone must bear witness to the patterns that repeat across the eons, the subtle manipulations that guide the fate of trillions. The chamber around me resonates with the weight of accumulated knowledge. Every surface holds the memory of those who came before, their voices echoing through time like whispers in a vast cathedral. Force ghosts from every era drift through these halls, their forms translucent but their purpose absolute. They are the guardians of truth, the keepers of secrets that were buried for good reason, yet must never be forgotten. Jedi Masters who discovered too much and paid the ultimate price for their curiosity. Sith Lords who glimpsed the true scope of their manipulation only in their final moments. Republic senators who uncovered conspiracies that spanned centuries. Imperial officers who realized their empire was merely the latest incarnation of something far more ancient and terrible. All of them are here, their essence preserved in the Force, waiting to share their fragments of the greater truth. As I prepare to recount this chronicle, I feel the familiar stirring of temporal echoes rippling through the Force. History has a strange way of rhyming, as the saying goes, but what most beings fail to understand is that this repetition is not natural, it is orchestrated, guided by a patient hand that has been shaping galactic events since before the first hyperdrive was invented. The Force itself seems to whisper warnings as I access these memories. There are things that were never meant to be known, secrets that carry a price for their telling. Yet the alternative is worse. To let this knowledge die with me would condemn future generations to repeat the same cycles of manipulation, to dance to the same ancient tune, without ever realizing they are puppets in a cosmic performance. I reach out through the Force, touching the consciousness of those who sleep in the galaxy's forgotten corners. Ancient beings who predate recorded history stir at my call, their awareness spanning dimensions that mortal minds cannot fully comprehend. They remember the time before the corruption, when the galaxy knew a different kind of peace. Their memories will be crucial in understanding what was lost, and perhaps what might yet be reclaimed. The first whispers speak of Tython, that ancient world where the Force was first studied and understood. But even those early records contain shadows, hints of something watching from beyond the edges of known space. The Jedi, who sought perfect balance between light and dark, never suspected that their very existence was being monitored, guided, shaped by an intelligence that had already learned to transcend the limitations of flesh and time. As I delve deeper into these primordial memories, I sense the presence of the one whose story dominates all others. He has worn countless faces, spoken through 1,000 different voices, yet his essence remains constant, patient, eternal, hungry. He is the thread that connects every tragedy, every war, every moment when the galaxy's fate hung in the balance. His influence stretches so far back that it predates the very concept of the Sith, yet his ultimate goal remains unchanged across the millennia. The weight of this knowledge settles upon me like a shroud, but it is a burden I was born to carry. For in bearing witness to the complete truth, in preserving these memories for those who will come after, there lies the only hope of breaking the cycle. The patterns can be recognized. The manipulation can be exposed. The ancient hunger can finally be denied the feast it has spent 25,000 years preparing. Let us begin then, with the first crack in the foundation of everything the galaxy thought it knew about the nature of good and evil. 25,793 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Tython system experienced its first taste of true darkness. The world itself was a paradise then, its crystalline formations and floating meditation stones creating a harmony between the physical and metaphysical that had endured for countless generations. The Jedi Order, those earliest students of the Force, had built their entire civilization around the principle of perfect balance between Ashla, the light, and Bogan, the dark. They believed themselves to be the masters of this balance, the wise guardians of an ancient truth that kept their world in perpetual harmony. How wrong they were. How tragically, catastrophically wrong. The Jedi temples rose like jewels from Tython's varied landscapes, each one dedicated to a different aspect of Force study. The Kaakesh, the Temple of Balance, stood at the heart of their civilization, its walls lined with the wisdom of ages. Bodhi, the Temple of the Arts, where creativity and the Force flowed together in perfect synthesis. Kalith, the Temple of Knowledge, its libraries containing scrolls and holocrons from the dawn of galactic civilization. But it was in the depths of Bogan, the moon they had dedicated to the study of darker emotions, that the first seeds of corruption were planted. Not by the Jedi themselves, though they would bear the blame for millennia to come. The corruption came from something far older, far more patient than any mortal mind could comprehend. Dagon Locke was his name, a Jedi ranger who had spent too many years walking the fine line between light and dark. To his fellow Jedi, he appeared to be a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when one strayed too far from the path of balance. But the truth was far more sinister. Locke had begun hearing whispers in the deep places of Bogan, ancient voices that spoke to him in languages that predated galactic civilization. These were not the natural emanations of the dark side that the Jedi had learned to study and understand. These were the carefully planted seeds of something that had been watching Tython for longer than the Jedi had existed. The whispers spoke of power beyond imagination, of techniques that could reshape reality itself. They showed Locke visions of a galaxy united under the guidance of those strong enough to seize control of destiny itself. Most seductively, they promised him immortality, the chance to transcend the limitations of flesh and become something eternal, something godlike. Locke's transformation was gradual, so subtle that even his closest companions failed to notice until it was too late. He began experimenting with Force techniques that violated every principle the Jedi held sacred. Where they sought balance, he pursued extremes. Where they practiced restraint, he embraced excess. And with each transgression, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent. The Force storms that began to ravage Tython seemed like a natural response to Locke's growing imbalance. The Jedi understood that their homeworld was deeply connected to the Force, that it reflected the spiritual state of those who dwelt upon it. What they did not understand was that these storms were not merely reactive, they were being orchestrated. Each lightning strike, each violent atmospheric disturbance was carefully calculated to drive the Jedi toward a specific response. As Locke's power grew, so did his followers. Other Jedi, seduced by the promises of strength and certainty, began to embrace the darker teachings. They called themselves the followers of Bogan, claiming to represent a necessary aspect of the balance their order so revered. But balance was never their true goal. They had become instruments of something far more ancient and malevolent, pawns in a game they could not even perceive. The confrontation, when it finally came, tore Tython apart. The Force wars that followed would reshape the very nature of galactic civilization, setting the stage for 25 millennia of conflict and manipulation. Jedi fought Jedi across the breadth of their world. Their mastery of the Force turned to purposes of destruction rather than harmony. But the most tragic aspect of the conflict was not the destruction it wrought, but the corruption it represented. For the first time in galactic history, the dark side of the Force had been weaponized, not as a tool of balance, but as an instrument of domination. The ancient whispers that had seduced Dagon Locke were not content with a single world or a single order. They had grander ambitions, a hunger that could only be satisfied by the corruption of the entire galaxy. When the smoke finally cleared, and the survivors of the Jedi Order looked upon what their conflict had wrought, they made a decision that would echo through the ages. Those who had fallen too deeply into darkness would be exiled, cast out beyond the edges of known space to prevent their corruption from spreading further. It seemed like wisdom at the time. In truth, it was exactly what the ancient whispers had wanted all along. For in their exile, these fallen Jedi would encounter civilizations that had been waiting for them, worlds that had been prepared across millennia for their arrival. The game was larger than any of them could have imagined, and they had just played their assigned roles to perfection. 5,000 years before the Jedi would taste their first bitter knowledge of corruption, another civilization had already learned to harness the dark side of the Force on a scale that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Rakata Infinite Empire stretched across 500 worlds, each one subjugated by technologies that fused the Force with matter in ways that seemed to violate the very laws of physics. From their throne world of Lihon, which they called Rakata Prime, these ancient beings ruled with an iron fist wrapped in the velvet glove of technological supremacy. Their ships moved through hyperspace without the primitive hyperdrive engines that other species would later develop. Instead, they channeled the Force itself through crystalline matrices that could fold space and time according to their will. Their weapons drew power directly from the dark side, growing stronger with each act of cruelty and domination they facilitated. The Starforge was the crown jewel of their technological achievements, a massive space station that could absorb the energy of an entire star and transform it into an endless stream of ships and weapons. But the Starforge was more than just a factory. It was a nexus of dark-side energy, a focal point that amplified the Rakata's connection to the corrupted aspects of the Force. Through it, they could project their influence across galactic distances, bending entire civilizations to their will without ever setting foot on their worlds. Yet for all their power, for all their technological mastery, the Rakata were not the architects of their own destiny. Archaeological evidence scattered across their former empire tells a different story, one written in hieroglyphs that predate Rakata civilization by millennia. Hidden chambers beneath their greatest monuments contain star maps that point not to Rakata exploration routes, but to something far more sinister. These maps show pathways to worlds that should have been unknown to them, routes through hyperspace that lead to regions the galaxy would not rediscover for thousands of years. The Rakata spoke in their records of teachers who came from the shadowed world, beings who showed them how to harness the Force in ways their primitive understanding had never imagined. These teachers brought with them technologies that seemed almost magical in their sophistication, devices that could manipulate the very building blocks of life itself. Under their guidance, the Rakata transformed from a species of modest Force sensitivity into the undisputed masters of the known galaxy. But this transformation came at a price that the Rakata were too intoxicated by power to recognize. Their teachers demanded payment in the form of suffering. Every world the Rakata conquered had to be broken in a specific way, its population reduced to slavery not just for economic purposes, but to generate the dark side energy that fed their mysterious benefactors. The more creative the cruelty, the more elaborate the psychological torment, the greater the reward in terms of technological advancement. The Force Hounds were perhaps the most tragic example of this systematic corruption. These were not Rakata, but members of conquered species who showed Force sensitivity. Rather than being destroyed, they were captured and subjected to procedures that twisted their connection to the Force into something monstrous. They became living weapons, their minds shattered and rebuilt according to Rakata specifications, their bodies enhanced through technologies that merged flesh with dark side energy. The creation of the Massassi was another example of the Rakata's terrible ingenuity. Originally a peaceful species with a natural connection to the Force, they were transformed through a combination of Sith alchemy and Rakata technology into the perfect warrior slaves. Their intelligence was reduced, their aggression amplified, their lifespans extended far beyond normal limits. They became the backbone of Rakata military might, utterly loyal and completely expendable. For thousands of years this pattern continued. Conquest, enslavement, experimentation, and the harvest of dark side energy on an industrial scale. The Rakata grew in power and sophistication, always pushing the boundaries of what was possible through the marriage of technology and the Force. They believed themselves to be evolution's pinnacle, the rightful rulers of a galaxy that existed for their pleasure and exploitation. But their teachers had not shared this vision of Rakata supremacy. The mysterious beings from the shadowed world had been using the infinite empire for their own purposes, harvesting not just the suffering of the Rakata's victims, but the dark side energy generated by the Rakata themselves. Every act of domination, every moment of cruel pleasure, every surge of pride in their technological achievements fed power into systems the Rakata did not even know existed. When the end came, it came swiftly. A plague swept through Rakata space. But this was no ordinary disease. It specifically targeted their connection to the Force, severing the neural pathways that allowed them to manipulate dark side energy. Without the Force, their technology became inert. Their ships fell from the sky. Their slaves rose in rebellion. Their empire crumbled in a matter of decades. The Rakata survivors huddled on their homeworld, struggling to understand what had gone wrong. Some blamed genetic degradation. Others pointed to the overuse of dark side energy. But their most ancient records, those hidden in the deepest vaults of their ruined civilization, told a different story. They spoke of the teachers departing, their purpose fulfilled. They mentioned the great harvest being complete, and the Red King being satisfied with the energy they had provided. The infinite empire became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and technological hubris. But the true lesson of the Rakata would not be understood for millennia to come. They had not been the architects of their own destruction. They had been tools carefully crafted and ultimately discarded by an intelligence so patient and far-seeing that it measured its plans not in years or centuries, but in geological ages. The Starforge drifted silent in its hidden system, waiting for the next set of players to discover its power and repeat the cycle. The Rakata's technology lay buried on 100 worlds, ready to tempt future civilizations with promises of easy dominion. And somewhere in the unknown regions, in places the galaxy's maps had never charted, the teachers waited for their next students to arrive. The 100-year darkness began not with a declaration of war, but with a question that would haunt the galaxy for millennia to come. In the halls of the nascent Jedi Order, barely 1,000 years removed from the ashes of the Jedi, a group of scholars and philosophers began to explore territories of Force knowledge that their predecessors had declared forbidden. They called themselves seekers of truth, believers that the Force should be studied in its entirety, rather than artificially constrained by the fear-based limitations their order had inherited from Tython's tragic history. Ajun Tapal was the first among them, a Jedi of remarkable power and even more remarkable intellect. His studies into Force techniques that predated the Jedi Order had revealed tantalizing hints of abilities that could reshape matter at the molecular level, extend life indefinitely, and bridge the gap between the physical and metaphysical realms. To Paul and his followers, these were not dark side techniques to be feared, but natural expressions of the Force's full potential that had been suppressed by an order too traumatized by ancient failures to embrace progress. Karnas Muir brought a different perspective to their growing movement. Where Paul sought individual transcendence, Muir was fascinated by the potential for biological manipulation on a massive scale. His research into the Rakul plague would eventually yield techniques for transforming entire species according to the will of those powerful enough to master such forces. He saw in the Force not just personal power, but the ability to guide evolution itself. Asugzan was perhaps the most dangerous of their number, though none would realize it until far too late. Her specialty was what she termed Force sorcery, the application of will and intention through ritual and incantation to achieve effects that seem to violate the fundamental laws of reality. Her experiments had led her to techniques that could manipulate time itself, peer across dimensional barriers, and communicate with entities that existed beyond the normal boundaries of the physical universe. Remulus Draper focused his research on the creation of what he called techno-beasts, living creatures enhanced through a fusion of force manipulation and primitive biotechnology. His laboratories, hidden in the deep levels of Coruscant, were filled with horrors that would have given even hardened warriors nightmares. But Draper saw only potential, the chance to create perfect servants immune to fatigue, fear, or the moral constraints that limited ordinary beings. For a century, these Dark Jedi and their growing number of followers waged war against the established Jedi Order. It was a conflict that stretched across dozens of star systems, each battle more brutal than the last, as both sides pushed the boundaries of what they thought possible through the Force. The Dark Jedi employed techniques that the traditional Jedi found abhorrent, while the Jedi began to adopt increasingly militaristic approaches that would have been unthinkable to their peaceful predecessors. When the war finally ended, it was not through victory or defeat in any conventional sense. The Jedi leadership, horrified by the destruction the conflict had wrought, and terrified by the implications of the powers the Dark Jedi had unleashed, made a decision that seemed merciful at the time. Rather than execute their fallen brothers and sisters, they would exile them, cast them out beyond the edges of known space, where their corrupted teachings could not poison another generation of Force users. 17 Dark Jedi Lords and thousands of their followers were loaded aboard ancient ships and sent into the unknown regions with only the most basic supplies and navigational data. The Jedi believed they were showing compassion, giving their former comrades a chance to find redemption in isolation rather than facing the justice they arguably deserved. In truth, they were playing into the hands of forces that had been manipulating galactic events since before their order existed. The journey through the unknown regions was treacherous, but it was not random. The Dark Jedi found themselves drawn toward specific hyperspace routes, guided by visions and Force impressions that seemed to come from outside their own minds. Strange phenomena led them ever deeper into uncharted space, past stellar formations that defied conventional understanding, and through regions where hyperspace itself seemed twisted into unnatural configurations. When they finally emerged from their exile, it was in a system dominated by a red giant star whose light bathed everything in the color of blood. The world they found waiting for them was called Korriban, and it was inhabited by a species that would change the course of galactic history. The Sith were a primitive people by galactic standards, but they possessed two qualities that made them invaluable to the exiled Dark Jedi. They had a natural, powerful connection to the dark side of the Force, and they had been waiting. The Sith possessed oral traditions that spoke of visitors from the stars who would one day arrive to lead them to greatness. Their burial mounds and ritual sites were oriented according to astronomical configurations that perfectly aligned with the Dark Jedi's arrival. Most unnervingly, their primitive art depicted beings who bore a striking resemblance to the exiled Jedi Lords, down to details of clothing and weaponry that should have been impossible for an isolated species to know. When Ajunta Pal and his followers landed on Korriban, they were not met with resistance or fear. Instead, the Sith fell to their knees in worship, hailing them as the gods their prophecies had promised would one day arrive. The transformation from exiled outcasts to divine rulers happened almost overnight, and with it came opportunities for power that none of the Dark Jedi had dared to imagine. The Sith species proved remarkably adaptable to the teachings of their new gods. Generations of selective breeding between the Dark Jedi and the most Force-sensitive Sith created hybrid offspring that combined human cunning with natural dark side abilities. These Sith-human hybrids became the foundation of a new civilization, one that would eventually span dozens of worlds and challenge the Republic itself for dominance of the galaxy. But even as they established their empire and proclaimed themselves the first Dark Lords of the Sith, the exiled Jedi remained unaware of the larger forces that had guided their journey. The visions that had led them to Korriban had not been products of their own power or insight. The Sith prophecies that had prepared their reception were not ancient traditions, but carefully planted suggestions that had been nurtured across generations. Everything about their exile and subsequent rise to power had been orchestrated by an intelligence so patient and far-seeing that it thought nothing of waiting millennia for its plans to come to fruition. The true architect of the Sith Empire had been watching and waiting on Korriban long before the first Dark Jedi set foot on its blood-red soil. His influence had shaped Sith culture for centuries, preparing them for the role they would play in his grand design. The exiled Jedi had not conquered the Sith. They had been absorbed into a civilization that existed to serve purposes they could never fully comprehend. They had become the latest actors in a drama that had been playing out across the galaxy since before recorded history began. In the 8 centuries that followed the arrival of the Dark Jedi on Korriban, the Sith Empire experienced a renaissance of dark side knowledge and power that would never again be equaled in galactic history. Under the guidance of their new Dark Lords, the Sith species evolved from primitive tribal societies into a sophisticated civilization capable of spanning star systems and manipulating the very fabric of reality through the Force. Ajunta Pal established himself as the first acknowledged Dark Lord of the Sith, but his rule was far more than mere political dominance. He became a conduit through which ancient knowledge flowed, teaching techniques that seemed to emerge fully formed from the deepest recesses of his consciousness. His mastery of Force lightning evolved beyond simple energy projection into a form of elemental control that could reshape landscapes and alter the chemical composition of entire atmospheres. The great Sith Academy that rose on Korriban during these years was a marvel of architecture and engineering that combined Sith architectural traditions with technologies that the exiled Dark Jedi should not have possessed. Its halls stretched deep into the planet's crust, connecting with natural cave systems that had been modified by unknown hands centuries before the Dark Jedi's arrival. In these chambers, students learned to push the boundaries of what was possible through the Force, guided by holocrons that contained knowledge spanning millennia. Karnas Mer's experiments with biological manipulation reached their full flowering during this period. His creation of the Rakul Plague was merely the beginning of his work with what would later be called Sith alchemy. In hidden laboratories carved from living rock, he learned to transform matter at the cellular level, creating new species of creatures that existed solely to serve the will of their Sith masters. His techniques for extending life through the consumption of Force energy would influence Sith philosophy for thousands of years to come. Exogzan's codification of Sith sorcery established the theoretical framework that would guide dark side research for millennia. Her rituals could manipulate probability itself, ensuring that chance would favor those who understood the proper invocations and gestures. She learned to create persistent effects that would outlast her physical form, embedding her will into locations and objects that would continue to influence events long after her death. Sorzu Sin emerged during this period as the philosopher of the Sith, the one who would write the definitive code that would guide their civilization's development. But her version of the code was far more sophisticated than the simple maxims that would survive into later eras. She understood the Sith way not as mere selfishness or cruelty, but as a fundamental alignment with the universe's natural tendency toward entropy and change. Her writings spoke of the Sith as agents of cosmic evolution, beings who had transcended the limitations that bound lesser species to cycles of stagnation and decay. Remulus Drapar's creation of Sith war behemoths represented the pinnacle of techno-biological engineering. These massive creatures combined the organic flexibility of living tissue with the durability and power of mechanical systems. They could survive in the vacuum of space, repair themselves from virtually any injury, and adapt their capabilities to meet changing tactical requirements. His workshops became centers of learning where the boundaries between life and technology dissolved entirely. The expansion of the Sith Empire during these centuries was not driven by simple conquest or territorial ambition. Each world that fell under Sith dominion was chosen for specific qualities that would enhance the Empire's overall power structure. Ziost became the administrative capital, its frigid climate and mineral wealth providing the resources needed to support massive construction projects. Drummond Kaya served as a center for Force research, its dense jungle environment creating natural Force nexuses that amplified Sith abilities. Yavin 4 held special significance in the Empire's expansion. The Massassi who inhabited the moon were descendants of one of the Rakata's earliest experiments in species modification. Their natural connection to the dark side of the Force and their instinctive understanding of monumental architecture made them invaluable to Sith plans. Under Sith guidance, they began construction of temple complexes that would serve purposes far beyond simple worship or ceremony. The Sith purebloods, who emerged from the interbreeding between the original Sith species and their Dark Jedi rulers, represented a new form of Force-sensitive being. They combined human intelligence and adaptability with the Sith species' natural dark side abilities, creating individuals who could manipulate the Force in ways that neither parent species could achieve alone. These hybrids became the aristocracy of the Sith Empire, serving as governors, generals, and high priests in the expanding civilization. But perhaps the most significant development of this era was the emergence of references to something called the Ancient Fear in multiple Sith texts and holocrons. This entity was spoken of in whispers even among the Dark Lords, described as a presence so ancient and powerful that it predated not just the Sith Empire, but the very concept of the Force as a quantifiable phenomenon. The greatest Sith Lords of the era spoke of receiving visions and guidance from this source, though none claimed to fully understand its nature or intentions. Hidden chambers discovered in the deepest levels of Korriban's temples contained star maps and navigational data that pointed toward regions of space that would not be explored for thousands of years. These chambers also held references to something called the Eternal Throne, described in terms that suggested it existed outside the normal flow of time and space. The Sith Lords who found these chambers often emerged changed, speaking of purposes and destinies that extended far beyond the empire they were building. The technology that the Sith developed during this period defied easy classification. Their ships moved through hyperspace using principles that would not be rediscovered until the height of the Galactic Empire. Their weapons drew power from sources that seemed to violate conservation of energy. Their architectural projects incorporated materials and engineering techniques that remained stable and functional for millennia without maintenance. Archaeological evidence from Sith worlds of this era reveals construction techniques and technological capabilities that were far in advance of what the exiled Dark Jedi should have been able to achieve. The mathematical precision of their temple alignments, the sophisticated understanding of Force nexus manipulation demonstrated in their city planning, and the sheer scale of their engineering projects all point to guidance from sources with knowledge that transcended the experience of any single generation. The art and literature of the Golden Age Sith reflected a civilization that saw itself not as conquerors or destroyers, but as the rightful inheritors of cosmic power. Their murals depicted not scenes of battle and domination, but complex philosophical allegories that portrayed the Sith as agents of universal transformation. Their poetry spoke of duties and responsibilities that extended beyond the physical galaxy, suggesting awareness of purposes that would not become clear for thousands of years. Yet for all their achievements, for all their power and sophistication, the Sith of this era remained unaware that they were building toward goals that had been established long before their empire existed. Every technique they developed, every world they conquered, every advancement in their understanding of the Force served purposes that would only become apparent when viewed across the full scope of galactic history. They had become the unwitting architects of their own eventual subordination to powers that thought in terms of geological ages rather than the brief spans of individual lifetimes. 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Sith Empire stood at the height of its power and sophistication. For nearly 2 millennia, they had built a civilization that spanned dozens of worlds, perfected dark side techniques that bordered on the miraculous, and created technologies that would not be equaled for thousands of years. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent triumph, forces were stirring that would transform the Empire's greatest strength into the instrument of its apparent destruction. Naga Sadow emerged from this environment as the most ambitious and far-sighted Dark Lord the Sith had yet produced. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on internal development and the perfection of Sith civilization, Sadow looked outward to the broader galaxy with a vision that encompassed the conquest and transformation of all known space. But his motivations were far more complex than simple territorial expansion or the desire for personal glory. In the deepest archives of Korriban, Sadow had discovered texts and holocrons that spoke of ancient prophecies and cosmic cycles that extended far beyond the lifespan of any single civilization. These records spoke of the Sith Empire not as an end in itself, but as a preparation for something greater. They described techniques for harvesting the force energy of entire star systems, methods for extending consciousness across galactic distances, and rituals that could transform physical matter into pure dark side energy. Most disturbing of all, these ancient records spoke of a coming convergence, a time when all the Empire's accumulated power would be required to serve purposes that transcended the physical galaxy. Sadow became obsessed with these prophecies, convinced that he had been chosen to guide the Empire toward its ultimate destiny. His rivalry with Ludo Kresh, the other major claimant to the position of Dark Lord, represented more than a simple power struggle. It was a conflict between two fundamentally different visions of what the Sith Empire should become. Kresh represented the conservative faction, those who believed the Empire should continue to focus on internal development and the perfection of their existing territories. He saw the ancient prophecies as metaphorical rather than literal, warnings about the dangers of overreach rather than instructions for cosmic transformation. His followers were content with the empire they had built, viewing it as the pinnacle of what the Sith could achieve rather than merely the foundation for something greater. Sadow's faction embraced a more radical interpretation of Sith destiny. They believed the prophecies were literal instructions that the Empire had been created specifically to accumulate the power and knowledge necessary for a transformation that would elevate the Sith beyond the limitations of physical existence. To them, the current Empire was merely a larval stage, a preparation for metamorphosis into something that could manipulate reality itself on a cosmic scale. The arrival of Gav and Jory Daragon in Sith space provided Sadow with the opportunity he had been waiting for. These Republic explorers, lost and terrified in a region of space they had stumbled into by accident, represented something far more valuable than simple prisoners or curiosities. They were the key to expanding the conflict beyond the borders of the Sith Empire, the catalyst that would allow Sadow to implement the ancient plans he had been studying for decades. But Sadow's manipulation of the Daragon situation was far more sophisticated than simple opportunism. Archaeological evidence from this period suggests that the hyperspace routes the Daragons followed to reach Sith space had been carefully prepared in advance. Beacon stations that should not have existed were discovered along their path, providing navigational guidance that led them directly to Korriban rather than any of the dozens of other Sith worlds they might have encountered. The conflict between Sadow and Kresh that followed the Daragons' arrival was orchestrated with mathematical precision. Every confrontation, every political maneuver, every moment of apparent chaos served to consolidate power in Sadow's hands while simultaneously preparing the Empire for the massive military campaign he was planning. The destruction of Kresh's forces was not the elimination of political opposition, but the removal of elements that might have interfered with the implementation of the ancient protocols Sadow had discovered. When Sadow finally launched his invasion of Republic space, it was not the reckless gamble that historians would later characterize it as. Every target was chosen for specific strategic and metaphysical significance. Coruscant was not attacked simply because it was the Republic capital, but because it sat at the intersection of hyperspace routes that had been mapped in Sith archives for centuries. The other worlds that came under assault were selected for their positions relative to force nexuses that could be used to channel dark side energy across galactic distances. The Sith fleet that emerged from hyperspace to attack the Republic represented the culmination of 2 millennia of technological and mystical development. Their ships were powered by systems that drew energy directly from the dark side of the Force, making them far more powerful and maneuverable than anything the Republic could field. Their weapons could not only destroy physical targets, but could drain the life force from entire populations, converting biological energy into power that could be transmitted back to the Sith Empire. Most terrifyingly, the Sith forces employed techniques of mass mind control that allowed them to turn captured populations into willing servants within hours of conquest. These were not simple applications of force persuasion, but sophisticated procedures that rewrote fundamental aspects of personality and memory. Entire worlds found their populations transformed into fanatical supporters of Sith rule, praising their conquerors even as their civilizations were systematically dismantled. The Republic's response to the Sith invasion revealed the true scope of the galaxy's unpreparedness for conflict on this scale. The Jedi Order, despite their connection to the Force, found themselves outmatched by Sith techniques that seemed to violate every principle they understood about the light and dark sides. Republic military forces, accustomed to conflicts between roughly equivalent technological civilizations, were devastated by weapons and tactics that rendered their defensive strategies obsolete. But the most shocking aspect of the war was not the Sith's military superiority, but the revelation that they possessed detailed knowledge of Republic infrastructure, politics, and military capabilities that should have been impossible for an isolated civilization to obtain. Sith forces struck with surgical precision at targets that were classified beyond the highest levels of Republic security. They seemed to know the locations of hidden shipyards, secret research facilities, and emergency government bunkers that were known only to a handful of individuals. As the war progressed, it became clear that Sadao was not fighting to conquer the Republic in any conventional sense. His forces would arrive at a world, engage in just enough combat to generate massive casualties on both sides, perform certain mysterious rituals at specific locations, and then withdraw to the next target. The pattern suggested that the invasion was serving purposes beyond simple territorial conquest, that each battle was designed to produce specific types and quantities of force energy that could be harvested for unknown purposes. The climax of the war came not through military victory or defeat, but through a series of cosmic phenomena that seemed to respond to the accumulated violence and suffering the conflict had generated. Hyperspace storms began to erupt throughout the galaxy, creating navigational hazards that made large-scale fleet movements impossible. Stars in several systems began to exhibit unusual activity, their energy output fluctuating in patterns that corresponded to no known stellar phenomena. When Sadao finally ordered the retreat of his forces, it was not in response to Republic military pressure, but because some predetermined condition had been met. The Sith fleet withdrew with the same precision and coordination they had shown during the invasion, but their destination was not Korriban or any other known Sith world. Instead, they disappeared into the deepest regions of the unknown regions, following hyperspace routes that led to coordinates that existed on no Republic star chart. The apparent destruction of Korriban that followed was one of the most misunderstood events in galactic history. Republic forces, pursuing the retreating Sith fleet, found the Sith homeworld apparently devastated by some massive internal conflict. The great temples lay in ruins, the cities were abandoned, and the planet's surface bore the scars of what appeared to be catastrophic force-powered warfare. To the Republic, it seemed that the Sith Empire had destroyed itself in its final moments, victims of their own dark side corruption. But the destruction of Korriban was as carefully orchestrated as every other aspect of Sadao's campaign. Hidden chambers deep beneath the planet's surface remained intact, preserving the most crucial archives and artifacts for future discovery. The Sith population had not been destroyed, but relocated, transported to hidden worlds in the unknown regions where they could continue their development away from galactic attention. Even the apparent devastation of the surface was designed to serve specific purposes, creating force disturbances that would persist for millennia and serve as beacons for those who knew how to interpret them. Sado himself retreated to Yavin 4, where he would spend the next 6 centuries in apparent exile. But his isolation was not punishment or defeat. It was the next phase of the plan he had been following since the beginning. On Yavin 4, he would continue his research into the ancient techniques he had discovered on Korriban, using the Massassi population as subjects for experiments that would push the boundaries of what was possible through Sith alchemy and force manipulation. The Great Hyperspace War had achieved exactly what it was designed to accomplish. It had demonstrated the Sith Empire's power to the broader galaxy, while simultaneously removing them from direct scrutiny. It had generated enormous quantities of dark side energy that could be harvested and stored for future use. Most importantly, it had established the Sith as a permanent threat in the galactic consciousness, ensuring that future conflicts would always carry the possibility of their return. The Republic's celebration of victory was premature and tragic. They had not defeated the Sith Empire. They had simply witnessed the completion of the first phase of a plan that spanned millennia. The true war was yet to come, and when it finally arrived, the galaxy would discover that everything they thought they knew about the nature of good and evil had been carefully constructed to serve purposes they could never have imagined. The truth that had remained hidden for over 5 millennia was far more terrible than even the most paranoid Republic intelligence analysts could have imagined. Behind every major event in galactic history, orchestrating conflicts and manipulating civilizations with the patience of geological time, stood a single consciousness that had transcended the normal boundaries of life, death, and physical existence. He was known by many names across the centuries: Tenebrae, Vitiate, Valkorion, the Sith Emperor. But these were merely roles he had played, masks he had worn, while pursuing goals that dwarfed the ambitions of every other being in galactic history. His true origin stretched back far beyond the formation of the Sith Empire, to a time when the galaxy was young and the Force itself was still learning the patterns that would govern reality for millions of years to come. Born on the world of Nindiri, in the year 5113, before the Battle of Yavin, the child who would become Vitiate demonstrated abilities that defied every understanding of what was possible through force manipulation. By the age of 6, he had consumed the life force of his own father. By 10, he had learned to drain entire ecosystems of their vitality. By 13, he had performed the ritual that would make him effectively immortal. But even these early demonstrations of power were merely the surface manifestations of something far more profound. Archaeological evidence from Nindiri suggests that the child's abilities were not natural developments, but the result of influences that predated his birth by centuries. Hidden chambers beneath his family's estate contained artifacts and inscriptions that seemed to be instructions, as if someone had been preparing for his arrival across multiple generations. The ritual of Nathema was the moment when Vitiate truly revealed the scope of his ambitions and capabilities. In a single ceremony that lasted for days, he consumed the force essence of 8,000 Sith Lords who had gathered to witness what they believed would be a demonstration of conventional dark side power. But Vitiate's technique went far beyond anything the assembled Sith could have imagined. He did not simply kill them, he unmade them, dissolving their connection to the Force so completely that even their potential for existence in any form was eliminated. The planet itself became a wound in the Force, a place where the very concept of life had been so thoroughly eradicated that space and time functioned according to different rules. But this was not collateral damage from Vitia's ascension to godhood. It was the intended result. Nathema became a nexus of anti-force energy, a focal point that allowed Vitias to project his influence across impossible distances and manipulate events in ways that conventional force users could never detect. From Nathema, Vitiate could reach across the galaxy to touch the minds of beings who had never heard his name. His consciousness could inhabit multiple bodies simultaneously, allowing him to play different roles in the same historical events while maintaining the illusion that he was bound by the same physical limitations as other beings. Most crucially, he could implant suggestions and desires into the minds of force-sensitive individuals that would not manifest for decades or centuries, creating patterns of behavior that served his purposes while appearing to be the result of natural character development. The establishment of the Eternal Empire on Zakuul represented the full flowering of Vitiate's vision for what a civilization could become under his direct guidance. Unlike the Sith Empire, which had been built on the foundation of existing species and cultures, Zakuul was created from the ground up according to Vitiate's specifications. Its population was genetically optimized for force sensitivity and psychological malleability. Its technology incorporated principles that would not be discovered by other civilizations for thousands of years. Its social structure was designed to generate the maximum possible amount of dark side energy, while maintaining the stability necessary for long-term planning. The Eternal Fleet that defended Zakuul was perhaps the most terrifying expression of Vitiate's capabilities. These ships were not simply advanced technology, they were extensions of his consciousness made manifest in physical form. Each vessel could think and act independently while remaining absolutely loyal to his will. They could repair themselves from virtually any damage, adapt their capabilities to meet changing tactical requirements, and coordinate their actions across galactic distances without any need for conventional communication systems. But the true horror of the Eternal Fleet was not its combat effectiveness, but what it represented in terms of Vitiate's long-term plans. The ships were designed not just to conquer worlds, but to process them. They could strip entire planets of their biological and mineral resources, convert those materials into dark side energy, and transmit that energy back to Vitiate's consciousness, regardless of the distance involved. They were, in essence, harvesting machines designed to consume reality itself and transform it into power that could be used to fuel ever greater acts of cosmic manipulation. Vitiate's influence over the ancient Rakata Infinite Empire became clear once the full scope of his timeline was understood. The teachers from the shadowed world that Rakata records mentioned were his agents, beings whose consciousness he had partially subsumed, and who served as conduits for his knowledge and manipulation. The Starforge itself was built according to his specifications, designed not just to produce ships and weapons, but to serve as a massive focus for dark side energy that could be tapped by those who understood its true purpose. The fall of the Rakata Empire was not the result of plague or genetic degradation, but a deliberate harvest. When the Empire had served its purpose in generating dark side energy and establishing technological capabilities that would influence galactic development for millennia, Vitiate simply withdrew his support. The plague that destroyed their force sensitivity was his creation, a biological weapon designed to sever their connection to the power they had been using while leaving their accumulated knowledge and infrastructure intact for future use. The Jedi on Tython was similarly orchestrated. The whispers that corrupted Dagon Lock and led to the Force Wars were Vitiate's influence, transmitted across impossible distances through techniques that would not be understood for thousands of years. The division of the Jedi into light and dark factions served his purposes by creating the philosophical framework that would guide galactic conflict for millennia. The exile of the Dark Jedi was not punishment but positioning, placing his most useful servants exactly where they needed to be for the next phase of his plan. The discovery of Korriban by the exiled Dark Jedi was the result of navigational data that Vitiate had been planting in their minds for decades. The Sith species had been shaped by his influence for centuries before the Dark Jedi arrived, their culture and biology modified to make them the perfect foundation for the empire he was planning to build. The prophecies that the Sith possessed about visitors from the stars were not ancient traditions but recently implanted memories designed to ensure the exiles would be welcomed rather than resisted. Every major Sith Lord throughout history had been guided by Vitiate's influence, though most remained unaware of their manipulation. Ajunta Pal's techniques for manipulating matter at the molecular level came from knowledge that Vitiate fed to him through carefully orchestrated visions. Karnas Mor's experiments with biological transformation followed research protocols that Vitiate had developed centuries earlier. Sozan's mastery of Sith sorcery was based on principles that Vitiate had been refining since before the formation of galactic civilization. The Great Hyperspace War represented the culmination of Vitiate's manipulation of the First Sith Empire. Nagar Sadar believed he was following ancient prophecies and fulfilling his destiny as a Dark Lord, but every aspect of his campaign had been planned by Vitiate in advance. The apparent destruction of the Sith Empire served multiple purposes. It removed galactic attention from Vitiate's activities, it generated enormous quantities of dark side energy that could be harvested, and it established the Sith as a persistent threat in the galactic consciousness that could be activated whenever future conflicts were needed. The retreat to Yavin 4 and the centuries of apparent exile that followed were not defeat but preparation. Sado's experiments with the Massassi population were conducted according to research protocols that Vitiate had provided, designed to create the perfect warrior servants for future conflicts. The temples that the Massassi built under Sado's direction were not simple monuments, but focal points for dark side energy that would serve as beacons for Vitiate's consciousness across galactic distances. The revelation of Vitiate's true nature and the scope of his influence recontextualized every major event in galactic history. The rise and fall of civilizations that had seemed to follow natural patterns were revealed to be carefully orchestrated cycles designed to serve his purposes. The conflicts between light and dark that had shaped galactic philosophy for millennia were exposed as artificial constructs created to generate the specific types of force energy that he required for his ultimate goal. That goal was nothing less than the consumption of all life in the galaxy, the transformation of every living being into dark side energy that could be absorbed into his consciousness. But even this galactic ambition was merely a stepping stone to something larger. Vitiate's plans extended beyond the boundaries of known space, encompassing other galaxies and even other dimensions of reality. He sought to become not just the ruler of the galaxy, but the living embodiment of the dark side itself, a cosmic force that could reshape reality according to his will. The discovery of this truth was a revelation that shattered every assumption about the nature of good and evil, free will and destiny that had guided galactic civilization for thousands of years. It revealed that the entire sweep of recorded history had been nothing more than the opening movements in a cosmic symphony of destruction and transformation that threatened not just individual worlds or civilizations, but the very concept of life itself. And most terrifying of all, it suggested that despite the apparent defeats he had suffered, despite the setbacks and delays that had accumulated over the millennia, Vitiate's plan was still proceeding exactly as he had intended from the very beginning. The revelation of Vitiate's true nature and the scope of his cosmic manipulation cast every subsequent chapter of Sith history in a fundamentally different light. The great Dark Lords who had shaped galactic events for thousands of years, the legendary figures whose names still inspired fear and respect millennia after their deaths, were revealed to have been unwitting servants of a will so vast and patient that their individual ambitions and achievements became mere footnotes in a grander narrative they could never have comprehended. Frida Nad's discovery of Naga Sado's teachings on Yavin 4 had seemed like the natural result of his quest for power and immortality. A fallen Jedi seeking forbidden knowledge, guided by visions and the promise of abilities that the traditional Jedi Order could never provide. But the archaeological evidence from Yavin 4 told a different story. The chambers where Nad found Sado's holocrons had been prepared in advance, arranged according to specifications that ensured he would encounter the specific teachings that would serve Vitiate's purposes most effectively. The knowledge that Nad absorbed during his time on Yavin 4 was not simply Sadow's legacy, but a carefully curated selection of techniques and philosophies that had been designed to create a specific type of Sith Lord. His mastery of what he believed to be ancient Sith alchemy was actually the implementation of research protocols that Vitiate had been developing for centuries. His ability to extend his life indefinitely and maintain consciousness after physical death followed procedures that Vitiate had perfected during his own transformation on Nathema. Most crucially, the visions that guided Nad to Onderon and his subsequent corruption of that world's royal family served purposes that extended far beyond his personal ambitions for power. Onderon's unique position along hyperspace routes that connected the core worlds to the outer rim made it an ideal location for establishing a dark side nexus that could influence galactic politics for generations. The chaos and suffering that resulted from the planet's civil wars generated precisely the type of force energy that Vitiate required for the next phase of his plan. Nan's spirit, bound to Onderon after his physical death, became a focal point for dark side energy that persisted for centuries. But this was not the result of his own power or the natural properties of Sith alchemy. It was a carefully constructed trap designed by Vitiate to create a permanent source of corruption that would ensure Onderon remained a source of dark side influence regardless of changing political circumstances. The various conflicts and upheavals that plagued the planet for generations were not random expressions of the dark side's chaotic nature, but precisely orchestrated events designed to maintain optimal levels of suffering and fear. Exarchon's fall to the dark side followed a pattern that had become depressingly familiar once Vitiate's influence was understood. A promising young Jedi, driven by curiosity and ambition to explore forbidden knowledge, guided by visions and dreams to locations where that knowledge waited to be discovered. His journey to the Sith worlds of the Outer Rim was not the result of scholarly interest or accidental discovery, but the inevitable conclusion of a process that had been decades in the making. The ancient Sith temples that Khorne explored during his transformation were not archaeological sites that had remained unchanged since the fall of the First Sith Empire. They were active installations, maintained and updated by Vitiate's agents across the centuries to ensure they would provide exactly the right influences to shape promising candidates according to his specifications. The holocrons that Khorne discovered contained not just ancient knowledge, but contemporary instructions tailored specifically to his psychological profile and force capabilities. Khorne's corruption of the Jedi students on Yavin 4 was perhaps the most tragic example of how Vitiate's manipulations could pervert even the most noble intentions. The young Jedi who followed Khorne believed they were participating in a reformation of the Order, a movement to expand Jedi understanding of the Force beyond the limitations imposed by centuries of rigid tradition. In reality, they were providing the raw material for one of Vitiate's most ambitious experiments in mass consciousness manipulation. The Great Sith War that followed was not a conflict between competing philosophies or political systems, but a carefully orchestrated harvest of force energy on a galactic scale. Every battle, every planet that fell to Khorne's forces, every Jedi who fell to the dark side, contributed to a growing reservoir of power that was being channeled directly to Vitiate's consciousness across the galaxy. The war's apparent conclusion with Khorne's defeat and the destruction of his fleet was simply the point at which Vitiate had accumulated sufficient energy to proceed to the next phase of his plan. Khorne's binding to Yavin 4 after his physical defeat followed the same pattern as Nad's fate on Onderon. His spirit became a permanent source of dark side corruption, ensuring that the moon would remain a focal point for future dark side activity. The Massassi temples that had been built under Sado's direction centuries earlier were revealed to have been designed specifically to contain and channel the type of spiritual energy that Kong's consciousness would provide. His imprisonment was not punishment but positioning, placing him exactly where Vitiate needed him to be for future operations. The revelation that Revan and Malak had been manipulated by Vitiate was perhaps the most shocking discovery in the entire chronicle of Sith deception. These two Jedi had been celebrated as heroes of the Republic, saviors who had defied the Jedi Council's passive stance to take action against the Mandalorian threat. Their subsequent fall to the dark side had been explained as the inevitable result of exposure to the horrors of war and the corrupting influence of the Starforge. The truth was far more complex and disturbing. Vitiate's manipulation of Revan and Malak began years before the Mandalorian Wars, through carefully planted dreams and visions that gradually shaped their understanding of what the Jedi Order should be. Their decision to defy the Council and join the war effort was not a spontaneous act of heroism, but the inevitable result of psychological conditioning that had been proceeding for most of their adult lives. Even their success in defeating the Mandalorians served Vitiate's purposes by establishing them as charismatic leaders capable of inspiring others to follow them into darkness. The discovery of the Starforge was not the result of Revan's brilliance or the natural progression of their war against the Mandalorians. The star maps that led them to the ancient Rakata space station had been carefully placed where they would be found, and the visions that guided Revan's understanding of the station's capabilities came directly from Vitiate's consciousness. The Starforge itself had been modified during the centuries since the fall of the Rakata Empire, enhanced with technologies that would ensure it served not just as a weapon of conquest, but as a massive collector of dark side energy. The Jedi Civil War that followed was a masterpiece of manipulation that served multiple purposes simultaneously. It weakened the Republic's military capabilities and political cohesion, making it more vulnerable to future Sith attacks. It generated enormous quantities of dark side energy as entire star systems were devastated by the conflict. Most importantly, it established a pattern of Jedi falling to darkness that would be repeated throughout galactic history, normalizing the concept of redemption and making it easier for future Sith agents to infiltrate the Order. Revan's capture and redemption by the Jedi was not the triumph of light over darkness that it appeared to be. Even his restored persona continued to serve Vitiate's purposes, though in ways so subtle that neither Revan himself nor his Jedi handlers ever suspected. His unique insights into both light and dark side techniques made him an invaluable source of intelligence about Jedi capabilities and limitations. His continued influence over former Sith followers created networks of potential agents that could be activated when needed. Most disturbing of all was the revelation that these great Sith Lords, despite their individual power and achievements, had been essentially interchangeable in Vitiate's grand design. The specific identities of Nad, Kun, Revan, and Malak were far less important than their functions in the cosmic machinery he had constructed. If any of them had failed to fulfill their assigned roles, others would have been guided into position to take their places. Their legendary status, their unique personalities and capabilities, even their moments of apparent free will, were all products of careful engineering designed to make them optimal tools for specific tasks. The conversations with their Force ghosts, when they finally understood the scope of their manipulation, revealed the true tragedy of their situations. Beings of tremendous power and intelligence, who had believed themselves to be the architects of their own destinies, discovered that every major decision they had made throughout their lives had been the result of external influence. Their proudest achievements were revealed to be someone else's plans, implemented through their unwitting agency. Their greatest moments of personal triumph were shown to be nothing more than successful completions of assigned tasks. Yet even in their despair and horror at these revelations, these ancient Sith Lords retained enough of their essential nature to recognize the broader implications of what they had learned. They understood that their manipulation was not an ending, but a continuing process, that Vitiate's influence extended far beyond their own eras and encompassed events that were yet to come. Their warnings about the true nature of the dark side and the dangers of assuming that apparent victories over Sith forces represented real triumphs became crucial elements in the eventual understanding of the threat that the galaxy faced. The pattern they had helped to establish, the cycle of corruption and redemption that had played out repeatedly throughout galactic history, was revealed to be a carefully maintained system for harvesting dark side energy while maintaining the illusion of meaningful conflict between light and dark. Their stories became cautionary tales not just about the dangers of individual corruption, but about the possibility that entire civilizations could be manipulated by forces so patient and far-seeing that resistance seemed futile. But in their collective testimony lay the seeds of hope, as well as despair. For if the manipulation could be recognized, if the patterns could be understood and exposed, then perhaps the cycle could finally be broken. Their experiences provided the knowledge necessary to recognize Vitiate's influence in its earliest stages, before it could take hold and begin the process of corruption that had claimed so many of the galaxy's greatest heroes. In bearing witness to their own deception, they had created the possibility that future generations might avoid repeating their tragic mistakes. 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy witnessed what appeared to be the final destruction of the Sith as an organized force. The Brotherhood of Darkness had been eradicated in a final battle on Ruusan that left both Sith and Jedi forces devastated. From the ashes emerged a single figure whose vision would reshape the dark side for the next millennium. Darth Bane, architect of the Rule of Two and unwitting agent of the most sophisticated deception in galactic history. Bane's discovery of the Rule of Two was presented as genuine innovation, a revolutionary insight that transformed the Sith from a numerous but fractured organization into something far more focused and dangerous. Only two Sith would exist at any time, a master to embody power and an apprentice to crave it. When the apprentice grew strong enough to destroy the master, they would take their place and select their own student, ensuring each generation would be stronger than the last. But the archaeological evidence told a different story. The holocron that guided Bane was not an ancient relic, but a contemporary creation, carefully placed where he would find it. The knowledge it contained about concentrating Sith power across generations was not the wisdom of long-dead Dark Lords, but instructions crafted specifically for his era by an intelligence that had been orchestrating galactic events for millennia. The thought bomb that destroyed both Sith and Jedi forces on Ruusan was not a desperate last resort, but a precisely calculated weapon designed to eliminate specific individuals while sparing others according to criteria that served Vitiate's purposes. The Sith Lords who died were not the strongest members of the Brotherhood, but those whose continued existence would have interfered with implementing the Rule of Two. Bane's survival was not due to superior power, but to protective measures put in place by forces he never suspected. The obelisk armor that he believed had saved his life was a carefully prepared tool, modified with biotechnology derived from Vitiate's experiments on Zakul. The creatures that formed the armor were sophisticated biological machines that could interface directly with their host's nervous system. The Rule of Two itself was a masterpiece of psychological engineering, serving multiple purposes in Vitiate's grand design. By limiting active Sith to just two individuals, it created a system that could be easily monitored and controlled by an external intelligence. Each master-apprentice pair became a node in a larger network spanning the galaxy, connected through force techniques the participants never suspected existed. The Sith Grand Plan that emerged was not a 1,000-year strategy developed by the Sith themselves, but the implementation of protocols Vitiate had been refining since the fall of the First Sith Empire. Every aspect, from infiltrating Republic institutions to systematically weakening the Jedi Order, followed methodologies tested across multiple galactic cycles. The Sith Lords, who believed themselves architects of this conspiracy, were following instructions embedded in their consciousness. Darth Zana became the prototype for all future Sith under the rule of two. Her training established patterns of behavior that would be passed down through the Sith lineage for the next millennium. The techniques she learned for concealing her presence, manipulating political events, and corrupting potential agents were all based on methods Vitiate had pioneered. The selection process guiding each master in choosing their apprentice served purposes beyond ensuring Sith continuity. Each new apprentice was chosen not just for Force potential but for specific psychological and genetic characteristics that would contribute to creating the perfect vessel for Vitiate's consciousness. The rule of two was revealed to be not just a training system but a breeding program. Emperor Palpatine had been intended as Vitiate's final host body. The Death Star was designed using Eternal Fleet technology. The Galactic Empire was Zackle rebuilt in the known galaxy. The Clone Wars were the final harvesting of galactic-scale dark-side energy that had been building for 1,000 years. The ancient whisper that had begun this chronicle grew stronger, and from that infinite darkness, a hunger that devoured galaxies awakened. The rule of two had succeeded beyond even Bane's imagination, but not in the way he had intended. It had created the perfect conditions for something far more terrible than galactic conquest. It had prepared the way for the consumption of reality itself. In the final century before the Battle of Yavin, the design that had been developing for 25 millennia approached its intended culmination. Darth Plagueis and his apprentice Darth Sidious, who would become Emperor Palpatine, represented the last two links in a chain of manipulation stretching back to the Force's origins. These Sith Lords believed themselves to be the architects of galactic destiny, the masterminds who would finally achieve ancient Sith dominion. In reality, they were the final instruments in a cosmic symphony composed long before either was born. Plagueis's obsession with conquering death through midi-chlorian manipulation seemed the natural evolution of Sith philosophy, the logical endpoint of millennia of research into life and the Force. His secret experiments on Munilinst appeared to represent cutting-edge biological and metaphysical science, but the techniques he employed, the equipment he used, and the theoretical frameworks guiding his research were all based on knowledge carefully provided through sources he never questioned. The ancient texts guiding Plagueis's understanding were not archaeological discoveries, but contemporary creations written in archaic languages to disguise their true origin. His experimental protocols had been tested across multiple galactic cycles, each iteration producing more sophisticated methods for separating consciousness from physical form. His laboratories contained devices incorporating technological principles unknown to contemporary civilization, machines that could interface directly with the Force itself. Most disturbing was the discovery that Plagueis's terror at sensing an ancient presence observing his experiments was accurate perception, not paranoid delusion. His growing awareness that something vast and patient was watching his work, evaluating his progress, and occasionally providing subtle guidance was the result of increasingly direct contact with Vitiate's consciousness. The nightmares plaguing his final years were carefully crafted visions designed to prepare him for his eventual role as sacrifice in the ritual completing his apprentice's transformation. Anakin Skywalker's creation through midi-chlorian manipulation was presented as an accident, an unintended consequence of Plagueis's experiments that resulted in the Force creating a being of unprecedented power to restore balance. But archaeological evidence suggested a far more sinister truth. The Chosen One's conception was not a spontaneous Force response to Sith manipulation, but the successful completion of a breeding program operating for thousands of years. The Skywalker bloodline could be traced through genetic records to families influenced by Sith agents across multiple generations. Each union had been carefully arranged to concentrate specific Force-sensitive traits while maintaining psychological characteristics that would make the eventual offspring suitable for their intended purpose. Anakin's mother Shmi had not been randomly selected, but identified and prepared since childhood, her entire life orchestrated to ensure she would be in the right place at the right time. Palpatine's training under Plagueis followed patterns established across the millennium of the Rule of Two, but with crucial modifications reflecting the approaching culmination of Vitiate's plan. His development as a political operative, his mastery of mass manipulation techniques, and his gradual accumulation of power within the Republic were guided by instructions refined through previous Sith Lords' experiences. But Palpatine's training included elements unique to his generation, techniques and knowledge withheld from previous apprentices because the time for implementation had not yet arrived. His understanding of galactic-scale ritual magic, his ability to manipulate the Force across interstellar distances, and his knowledge of technologies amplifying dark side energy were all derived from sources predating the Rule of Two by millennia. Plagueis's murder was not the spontaneous act of an ambitious apprentice seizing power, but a carefully timed ritual serving multiple purposes in Vitiate's design. Plagueis's death released enormous Force energy that had been building in his consciousness for decades, energy immediately absorbed by mechanisms hidden in his laboratories since their construction. Simultaneously, his death severed the last link between Palpatine and the traditional Rule of Two structure, freeing him to implement techniques impossible while his master lived. The Clone Wars represented the culmination of everything the Sith had learned about manipulating galactic-scale conflicts for harvesting dark-side energy. Unlike previous wars influenced by Sith manipulation, this conflict was designed from the beginning to serve metaphysical rather than political purposes. Every battle was positioned to maximize fear and suffering. Every major engagement was timed to coincide with astronomical events, amplifying the dark side energies produced. Order 66's systematic elimination of the Jedi Order was not simply a military operation to remove opposition to Sith rule. It was a massive blood sacrifice, a ritual of unprecedented scope transforming thousands of Force-sensitive beings' life force into dark-side energy, fueling the final transformation Vitiate had been preparing for millennia. The clone troopers carrying out executions had been conditioned not just to follow orders, but to serve as conduits for energy released by their victims' deaths. The Death Star incorporated technologies and design principles developed across multiple galactic cycles, representing the fusion of Rakata engineering, eternal fleet automation systems, and innovations Vitiate had pioneered on Zakuul. Palpatine's reign as Emperor was characterized by systematic policies designed to maximize suffering throughout the galaxy, while maintaining industrial capacity for his cosmic ambitions. Slave labor camps, ecological exploitation, and bureaucratic systems making basic survival increasingly difficult were all calculated to maintain optimal dark side energy generation levels. Luke Skywalker's development as a potential heir was not a backup plan, but an integral part of the cosmic ritual. Vitiate had been preparing for thousands of years. Luke's training by Obi-Wan and Yoda, his confrontations with Vader, and his ultimate face-off with the Emperor were all carefully orchestrated events designed to concentrate the Skywalker bloodline's power into a form that could serve as a bridge between Vitiate's ancient consciousness and the physical galaxy he intended to consume. Yet even in this darkest understanding, elements remained that offered hope for eventual salvation. The very perfection of Vitiate's manipulation had created vulnerabilities he could not perceive from his cosmic perspective. The love and sacrifice he had sought to exploit contained genuine power that could not be corrupted. The connections between beings he had manipulated had also created resistance networks operating beyond his ability to monitor. The final vessels had been prepared, the cosmic ritual completed, and the ancient hunger was ready to begin its ultimate feast. But the galaxy Vitiate sought to consume was not the same passive collection of resources he had been manipulating for millennia. It had been changed by its experiences, strengthened by its struggles, and prepared in ways even his vast intelligence had not anticipated for the final confrontation that would determine all life's fate in known space. The celebration following the Battle of Endor was perhaps the most tragic moment in galactic history, not because of immediate catastrophe, but because it represented the galaxy's complete misunderstanding of what had transpired. Across 1,000 worlds, beings who had suffered under imperial oppression believed they were witnessing the dawn of freedom and prosperity. The new republic, founded on principles of democracy, justice, and individual rights, seemed to represent everything the Sith had sought to destroy. In reality, these hopeful developments were simply the next phase of a plan millennia in the making. Emperor Palpatine's apparent death had not eliminated the vast network of dark side artifacts, hidden installations, and conditioned agents established during the Rule of Two's millennium. These resources remained active, operating according to protocols designed to continue functioning regardless of changes in galactic political leadership. The New Republic's government, despite its commitment to transparency and democracy, was infiltrated from its inception by individuals serving masters they did not know existed. Luke Skywalker's efforts to rebuild the Jedi Order were influenced by discoveries that seemed to represent recovered ancient wisdom and lost techniques. Hidden caches of Jedi artifacts, forgotten temples on remote worlds, and ancient texts that had somehow survived the Great Purge provided him with knowledge to train a new generation of Force users. But many discoveries were not genuine archaeological finds, but carefully planted materials designed to guide the new Jedi Order's development in directions serving Vitiate's continuing purposes. The training methods Luke developed, based on traditional Jedi philosophy, combined with insights from his confrontations with Vader and Palpatine, seemed to represent a more balanced approach to Force education than the old Order's rigid doctrines. His emphasis on emotional honesty and integrating light and dark aspects appeared to address weaknesses that led to the Jedi's previous failures. But these apparently innovative approaches were actually following educational protocols developed centuries earlier, designed to produce Force users with exactly the capabilities and psychological profiles most useful for the cosmic ritual still proceeding. The various conflicts plaguing the New Republic during its early decades were dismissed as inevitable growing pains of a new government attempting to impose order on a galaxy traumatized by decades of authoritarian rule. The Imperial remnants' continued resistance, the emergence of dark-side cults and criminal organizations, and persistent political instability preventing the Republic from achieving peace, all seemed like natural consequences of the Empire's collapse, rather than orchestrated events serving a larger agenda. But the pattern revealed a more sinister truth. Each crisis was perfectly timed to prevent the Republic from achieving stability necessary to investigate hidden aspects of recent galactic history. Every victory against remnant Imperial forces was followed by new threats requiring immediate attention. The dark side cults appearing across the galaxy were not random expressions of lingering Sith influence, but coordinated operations designed to maintain optimal fear and suffering levels while testing new mass manipulation techniques. Ben Solo's fall to the dark side was one of the most tragic examples of how Vitiate's influence continued operating during this period. The young Jedi's corruption was not the result of personal weakness or inadequate training, but the culmination of influences affecting the Skywalker bloodline for generations. The nightmares and visions plaguing him during adolescence were not random Force sensitivity expressions, but carefully crafted psychological attacks designed to exploit specific vulnerabilities bred into his genetic line. The persona of Kylo Ren that emerged represented more than simple dark side corruption. It was the activation of programming embedded in the Skywalker bloodline since Anakin's creation, designed to produce a Force user with the exact combination of power, emotional instability, and psychological dependency that would make him an ideal vessel for external consciousness. His obsession with Vader's legacy was not hero worship, but a form of possession, his mind being gradually prepared to serve as a host for influences transcending individual identity. The destruction of Luke's Jedi Academy was not a spontaneous act of rage, but a carefully orchestrated event designed to eliminate potential interference with the next phase of Vitiate's plan. The students who died were not random casualties, but specific individuals whose continued development would have posed threats to the cosmic ritual approaching its culmination. Even Luke's self-imposed exile to Arch 2 served the plan's purposes by removing the galaxy's most powerful Force user from active involvement during the crucial period when the First Order was being established. The emergence of the First Order from the unknown regions was presented as the natural evolution of Imperial remnant forces building strength in secret for decades. Their advanced technology, fanatical devotion to Imperial ideology, and sophisticated understanding of galactic politics and military strategy seemed to represent careful planning by surviving Imperial leaders. But the First Order's true origins were far more ancient and disturbing than anyone in the New Republic suspected. The technology powering the First Order's war machine incorporated design principles and engineering techniques developed across multiple galactic cycles. Their starships combined Imperial engineering with innovations that seemed to violate known principles of physics and hyperspace travel. Their weapons systems drew power from sources no contemporary civilization should have been able to access. Most significantly, their organizational structure and command protocols followed patterns tested and refined across thousands of years of galactic manipulation. Starkiller Base represented the ultimate evolution of superweapon technology, combining the Death Star's planet-killing capabilities with engineering principles derived from the Starforge and other ancient installations. But its true purpose was not simply destroying enemy worlds or intimidating opponents. The massive weapon was designed to serve as a focusing array for dark side energy on a scale dwarfing anything attempted in galactic history. Each planet it destroyed provided enormous quantities of fear and anguish that could be converted into power and transmitted across interdimensional barriers to consciousnesses existing beyond normal space and time boundaries. Supreme Leader Snoke's true nature remained one of this period's most disturbing mysteries. His apparent mastery of dark side techniques surpassing anything demonstrated by previous Sith Lords, his knowledge of galactic history encompassing events from multiple eras, and his ability to manipulate Force-sensitive individuals from vast distances all suggested origins transcending normal biological limitations. Archaeological evidence from First Order installations revealed artifacts and technologies bearing design characteristics matching items from Vitiate's Eternal Empire, suggesting connections spanning thousands of years. The revelation that Rey was descended from the Palpatine bloodline was not random fate, but the culmination of breeding programs operating since the Rule of Two's establishment. Her connection to the Skywalker line through her relationship with Ben Solo created a Force dyad of unprecedented power, exactly the type of psychic linkage Vitiate's ancient texts had described as necessary for his cosmic transformation's final phase. Her emergence as a powerful Force user without formal training was not spontaneous development, but the activation of capabilities carefully bred into her genetic heritage across multiple generations. The visions guiding Rey's understanding of her destiny and role in the galactic conflict were not mystical Force insights, but carefully crafted psychological programming designed to ensure she would make choices necessary to complete the ritual developing for millennia. Her journey to find Luke Skywalker, her training on Arch 2, and her confrontations with Kylo Ren were all following a script written long before she was born, each event serving to concentrate and focus the power needed for Vitiate's final transformation. The New Republic era that began with such hope was revealed to be nothing more than an intermission between acts of a cosmic drama approaching its climax. The freedom and democracy billions of beings had celebrated were illusions maintained only as long as they served purposes of forces thinking in geological ages rather than individual lifetimes. The heroes who had sacrificed everything to defeat the Empire had unknowingly prepared the galaxy for an even greater threat, one that would make Imperial rule's horrors seem like minor inconveniences by comparison. Yet even in this darkest period, there were signs that the ancient manipulator's control was not as absolute as he believed. The very complexity of systems he had established over millennia had created opportunities for unexpected developments and spontaneous resistance. The connections between beings he had fostered to serve his purposes had also generated genuine relationships and loyalties that could not be easily corrupted. Most importantly, his plan's cyclical nature had created patterns that could be recognized and potentially disrupted by those who understood what they truly faced. The stage was being set for a final confrontation that would determine not just the galaxy's fate, but the nature of existence itself. The ancient hunger that had been growing for 25,000 years was finally ready to begin its ultimate feast, but the galaxy it sought to consume had been changed by its long ordeal in ways even Vitiate's vast intelligence had not fully anticipated. The Emperor's return on Exegol was not the resurrection of Palpatine as the galaxy believed, but the final revelation of Vitiate wearing a familiar face. For decades, the ancient consciousness had been preparing for this moment, when he would abandon the complex network of identities and personas he had maintained across millennia and consolidate his power into a form capable of beginning the final phase of his cosmic plan. The hidden Sith world of Exegol existed in interdimensional space, a nexus where the boundaries between realities were thin enough to allow manipulation on a universal scale. The Final Order represented the culmination of 25,000 years of technological development and dark side research. The massive fleet that emerged from Exegol's hidden shipyards incorporated design elements from every major civilization Vitiate had influenced across galactic history. Rakata engineering principles powered their hyperspace capabilities. Eternal fleet automation systems controlled their movements. Ancient Sith alchemy had been fused with technologies that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics, creating weapons that could destroy entire star systems while simultaneously harvesting the psychic energy released by their victims' terror and despair. Each of the thousands of star destroyers in the Final Order was more than a warship. They were extensions of Vitiate's consciousness, capable of independent thought and action while remaining absolutely loyal to his will. Their planet-killing weaponry was not simply designed for military conquest but for feeding each world they destroyed, providing massive quantities of dark side energy that could be absorbed directly into their master's cosmic awareness. The fleet represented the ultimate fusion of technology and consciousness, matter and spirit, physical power and metaphysical dominion. The Sith eternal cultists who served this fleet were not ordinary beings who had been corrupted by dark side influence. They were the products of breeding programs that had been operating in secret for generations, genetically modified to serve as perfect conduits for Vitiate's will. Their chanting and rituals were not simple ceremonies but sophisticated consciousness transfer protocols designed to channel their combined life force into the cosmic entity they worshipped without understanding. Their devotion was not faith but programming, embedded so deeply in their genetic structure that they experienced serving Vitiate as their most fundamental biological imperative. Exegol itself defied conventional understanding of planetary formation and stellar mechanics. The world existed partially outside normal space-time, anchored to reality through technologies that predated known galactic civilization by millions of years. Its massive Sith citadel was built according to architectural principles that seemed to bend space around themselves, creating interior volumes far larger than the structure's external dimensions should have allowed. The throne room where the Emperor held court was a nexus of dark side energy, so intense that reality itself became malleable, responding to his will in ways that transformed thought directly into physical manifestation. Rey's arrival on Exegol with the Resistance fleet was not an unexpected challenge to Vitiate's plans, but the completion of a ritual that had been designed around her participation. Her Palpatine bloodline made her the perfect vessel for his consciousness, but her connection to Ben Solo through their Force dyad created an unprecedented opportunity for power amplification. The psychic bond between them represented a level of force connection that had not existed since the dawn of galactic civilization, exactly the type of linkage that Vitiate's ancient texts had described as necessary for transcending the boundaries between individual consciousness and cosmic awareness. The final confrontation in the throne room was choreographed according to specifications that had been established millennia earlier. Every word spoken, every gesture made, every moment of apparent choice or resistance was following a script that had been refined across multiple galactic cycles. Vitiate's offer to make Rey his heir was not a genuine proposal, but a necessary component of the consciousness transfer ritual, designed to create the psychological conditions that would allow him to inhabit her body, while maintaining access to the unprecedented power generated by her connection to Ben Solo. Ben Solo's arrival on Exegol and his confrontation with the Knights of Ren represented the activation of programming that had been embedded in the Skywalker bloodline since Anakin's creation. His moment of redemption and his decision to help Rey was not a spontaneous triumph of light over darkness, but the fulfillment of genetic imperatives that had been carefully bred into his family line across multiple generations. His sacrifice during the final battle was designed to concentrate the combined power of both the Skywalker and Palpatine bloodlines into a single moment of cosmic significance, creating conditions that would allow Vitiate to transcend physical existence entirely. The intervention of all the Jedi throughout galactic history, speaking through Rey during her final confrontation with the Emperor, represented something that Vitiate had not anticipated in his calculations. The connections between Force users across time and space had created a network of consciousness that operated independently of his manipulation and control. The voices that spoke through Rey were not simply echoes of the past, but active participants in a cosmic resistance that had been building strength across millennia, waiting for the moment when they could strike back against the entity that had corrupted their galaxy for so long. The massive Force lightning storm that erupted during the final battle was Vitiate's attempt to harvest the life force of every being in the galaxy simultaneously, converting biological energy into dark side power on a scale that would make him the living embodiment of entropy itself. The technique was based on principles he had developed during the ritual of Nathema, but amplified through technologies and consciousness transfer protocols that had been perfected across thousands of years. For a brief moment, it seemed that 25 millennia of patience and planning would finally achieve their ultimate goal. But Rey's sacrifice disrupted the consciousness transfer process at the critical moment, creating a feedback loop that scattered Vitiate's awareness across multiple dimensions instead of consolidating it into cosmic godhood. Her death was not simply heroic self-sacrifice, but a precisely calculated disruption of metaphysical processes that had been building toward culmination for geological ages. The love and connection she shared with Ben Solo provided a source of power that operated according to principles fundamentally incompatible with Vitiate's vision of cosmic domination. Ben Solo's decision to give his life force to revive Rey completed the disruption of Vitiate's plan by creating a permanent connection between their consciousnesses that could not be corrupted or controlled by external influence. Their brief moment together before his death established a psychic bond that would persist beyond physical existence, creating a foundation for resistance to dark side manipulation that could not be easily overcome or destroyed. The destruction of the Final Order fleet and the apparent death of the Emperor represented not just military victory, but the successful disruption of cosmic processes that had been building toward catastrophe for 25,000 years. The massive quantities of dark side energy that had been accumulating across galactic history were suddenly released without direction or purpose, dissipating back into the cosmic force, instead of being consolidated into the singular consciousness that had sought to consume reality itself. Yet even as the galaxy celebrated what appeared to be ultimate victory over the forces of darkness, there remained disturbing questions about the true scope of what had been accomplished. Vitiate's consciousness had been scattered rather than destroyed, his influence disrupted rather than eliminated. The technologies and artifacts that had served his purposes across millennia remained hidden throughout the galaxy, waiting for someone else to discover and potentially misuse them. Most significantly, the fundamental conditions that had made his manipulation possible in the first place had not been addressed or resolved. The patterns of conflict between light and dark that had characterized galactic history for so long had been shown to be artificial constructs created to serve purposes beyond the understanding of those who participated in them. The cycles of hope and despair, victory and defeat, progress and regression that had seemed like natural aspects of galactic civilization were revealed to be carefully maintained systems for generating and harvesting dark side energy. Breaking these patterns would require more than defeating a single enemy, no matter how powerful or ancient. The sequel era concluded with the galaxy free from direct manipulation for the first time in 25,000 years. But also faced with the enormous challenge of learning to exist without the hidden guidance that had shaped every aspect of their development. For better or worse, beings throughout known space would finally have the opportunity to determine their own destinies, to make choices based on their own values and desires, rather than serving purposes they had never understood. Whether they would prove capable of building something better than what they had inherited remained to be seen, but for the first time in galactic history, the possibility of genuine freedom had become real. In the months and years that followed the Battle of Exegol, the galaxy slowly began to awaken to the true scope of what had been hidden from them for millennia. The destruction of the Final Order and the scattering of Vitiate's consciousness had broken patterns of manipulation that had operated for so long that most beings had never known any other way of existence. But with that freedom came the enormous challenge of learning to navigate reality without the hidden guidance that had shaped every aspect of galactic development since the dawn of recorded history. Archaeological expeditions to former Sith worlds revealed the staggering extent of the infrastructure that had been built to support Vitiate's cosmic manipulation. On Korriban, teams of researchers discovered vast underground complexes that had remained hidden beneath the planet's surface for thousands of years. These installations contained technologies that seemed to violate known laws of physics, devices that could manipulate consciousness across galactic distances, and archives that documented the systematic corruption of galactic civilization across multiple cycles of rise and fall. The excavations on Drummond Cassis uncovered similar revelations, but on an even more disturbing scale. The jungle world's ancient temples were revealed to be merely the visible portions of massive technological complexes that extended deep into the planet's core. These installations had been actively monitoring and influencing galactic events for millennia, their crystalline arrays serving as focal points for dark side energy that had been harvested from conflicts across known space. The sheer scale of the operation suggested a level of planning and resource allocation that dwarfed anything previously imagined. Zyos presented perhaps the most haunting evidence of Vitiate's influence. The ice-covered world had served as a testing ground for consciousness transfer technologies and biological modification programs that had produced innovations later implemented throughout his network. Perfectly preserved laboratories contained the remains of experiments that had pushed the boundaries of what was possible through the combination of technology and dark side manipulation. The researchers who explored these facilities often emerged changed by their experiences, having gained insights into the nature of consciousness and reality that challenged fundamental assumptions about the universe itself. In the unknown regions, expeditions to Zakul discovered a civilization that had been shaped by vitiate's influence for thousands of years longer than any world in known space. The Eternal Empire's advanced technology and sophisticated understanding of force manipulation had made them the testing ground for techniques that would later be implemented on a galactic scale. But their isolation had also preserved knowledge and traditions that offered insights into alternative approaches to cosmic power that did not require the consumption and domination that had characterized vitiate's methods. The Zakuulans, who had survived their emperor's final transformation, possessed memories and genetic modifications that made them valuable sources of information about consciousness transfer techniques and interdimensional manipulation, but they also carried trauma from millennia of being used as experimental subjects in cosmic research projects they had never fully understood. Their rehabilitation and integration into galactic society became a template for dealing with other populations that had been similarly affected by long-term Sith manipulation. Force nexuses throughout the galaxy began to change as the dark side energies that had been artificially concentrated in them for millennia were finally allowed to dissipate and return to natural patterns. Worlds that had been sites of persistent conflict and suffering experienced a gradual healing process that manifested in improved weather patterns, increased biological diversity, and the spontaneous emergence of art and philosophy celebrating life rather than glorifying power and domination. On Coruscant, the hidden chambers beneath the former Jedi Temple were finally opened and thoroughly explored. The discoveries made in these installations revolutionized understanding of galactic history and revealed the extent to which even the most noble institutions had been infiltrated and influenced by Sith manipulation. Ancient monitoring devices had recorded conversations and decisions spanning centuries, providing a detailed record of how manipulation had been applied at the highest levels of galactic government and religious organization. Rey's new Jedi Order was built on foundations of complete transparency and historical awareness that represented a radical departure from the traditions of previous Force-using organizations. Students learned not just techniques for manipulating the Force, but comprehensive galactic history that included detailed analysis of how manipulation and deception had been used to corrupt previous generations of Force users. The emphasis was placed on developing resistance to external influence rather than simply accumulating power or achieving enlightenment. The training methods developed for this new generation of Jedi incorporated lessons learned from studying vitiate's manipulation techniques. Students practiced recognizing the subtle signs of consciousness transfer attempts, learned to identify artificially implanted thoughts and desires, and developed techniques for maintaining psychological independence even when exposed to sophisticated forms of mental influence. These skills proved valuable not just for Force users, but for ordinary beings who had discovered they had been unknowingly serving as agents or information sources for hidden networks. Former Imperial and First Order worlds underwent massive cultural transformations as their populations learned to distinguish between their genuine beliefs and values and the programming that had been systematically embedded in their societies across multiple generations. The process was often traumatic, as beings discovered that much of what they had considered to be their own thoughts and opinions had actually been carefully crafted by external influences. Support networks emerged to help individuals and communities navigate the psychological challenges of developing genuine autonomy for the first time in their lives. The technological legacy of vitiate's influence presented both opportunities and dangers for the post-Exegol galaxy. Many of the devices and techniques he had developed could be adapted for beneficial purposes, but they all carried the risk of being used to recreate the same patterns of manipulation and control that had just been broken. strict protocols were established for studying and utilizing Sith technologies, with emphasis placed on developing safeguards that would prevent any individual or organization from accumulating the type of power that could threaten galactic freedom. Perhaps the most significant change was the emergence of new forms of cooperation and communication between species and civilizations that had been artificially divided by centuries of manipulated conflict. As beings throughout the galaxy learned that many of their historical grievances had been deliberately fostered and maintained by external influences, they began to develop relationships based on genuine mutual understanding rather than inherited prejudices and fears. The economic systems that emerged during this period reflected a fundamental shift away from the resource extraction and consumption patterns that had characterized galactic civilization for millennia. New technologies developed from studying Vitiate's archives made it possible to meet material needs without the massive environmental destruction that had previously been considered inevitable. More importantly, the psychological changes that accompanied freedom from manipulation led to new definitions of prosperity and success that emphasized spiritual and cultural development rather than simple accumulation of power and wealth. Yet the process of recovery was not without its challenges and setbacks. Some beings and organizations found the prospect of genuine freedom overwhelming, preferring the certainty and structure that had been provided by hidden manipulation to the responsibility and uncertainty that came with autonomous choice. Movements emerged that sought to recreate the patterns of authority and submission that had characterized the Sith era, though without understanding the cosmic purposes those patterns had originally served. The galaxy that emerged from this period of healing and transformation was fundamentally different from anything that had existed in recorded history. For the first time in 25,000 years, beings were making choices based on their own values and desires, rather than serving purposes they did not understand. The conflicts that arose were genuine expressions of different perspectives and interests, rather than artificially manufactured divisions designed to generate dark side energy. Most importantly, the cycles of hope and despair that had characterized galactic history for so long were finally broken, replaced by the uncertain but genuine possibility of continuous growth and development. The peaceful moments that characterized this era had a quality that previous generations had never experienced. The Force itself seemed to flow more freely, unencumbered by the artificial concentrations and distortions that had been maintained for cosmic manipulation purposes. Natural beauty flourished on worlds that had been sites of persistent conflict, and art and music emerged that celebrated the simple joy of existence rather than serving as tools for emotional manipulation or psychological control. As this period of recovery and transformation continued, it became clear that breaking the cycles of ancient manipulation was only the beginning of a much longer process of learning to exist in genuine freedom. The galaxy would need to develop new institutions, new forms of cooperation, and new approaches to resolving conflicts that did not depend on the hidden guidance that had shaped every previous era of galactic history. But for the first time in 25 millennia, that development could proceed according to the genuine choices and values of the beings who inhabited known space, free from the influence of cosmic parasites seeking to harvest their suffering for incomprehensible purposes. As the galaxy continued its recovery from millennia of hidden manipulation, a remarkable discovery began to transform understanding of the Force itself. Deep beneath the surface of Tython, in chambers that had been sealed since before the Jedi Schism, archaeologists uncovered archives that predated any known Force-using civilization. These ancient repositories contained knowledge of the Force as it had existed before corruption by entities like Vitiate, revealing techniques and philosophies that had been lost for so long that their very existence had become mythical. The original Jedi teachings discovered in these archives presented a radically different understanding of the relationship between light and dark aspects of the Force. Rather than the eternal conflict that had characterized galactic philosophy for thousands of years, these ancient texts described a natural harmony where different aspects of force energy complemented rather than opposed each other. The darkness was not something to be feared or conquered, but understood as a necessary component of cosmic balance, representing transformation, renewal, and the creative potential that emerged from dissolution and change. Technologies powered by this balanced understanding of the Force operated on principles that seemed almost magical compared to the consumption-based methods that had dominated galactic civilization for millennia. Instead of drawing energy from external sources or requiring the suffering of other beings to function, these devices worked in harmony with natural force flows, actually enhancing the cosmic balance rather than disrupting it. Starships that could travel vast distances without depleting resources, healing technologies that strengthened rather than depleted those who used them, and communication systems that connected consciousness across galactic distances without invading or manipulating the minds involved. The Force entities that began to emerge from hiding after Vitiate's defeat had been waiting in isolation for thousands of years, preserving knowledge and techniques that represented alternatives to the power through domination paradigm that had shaped galactic development for so long. These beings, who existed in states that transcended normal biological limitations, had witnessed the corruption of galactic civilization from its earliest stages and had maintained themselves in hidden sanctuaries while waiting for conditions that would allow them to share their wisdom safely. The Wills, ancient chroniclers of cosmic events who had observed galactic development from perspectives that spanned geological ages, revealed themselves to scholars and researchers who demonstrated genuine commitment to understanding rather than exploiting the knowledge they possessed. Their archives contained detailed records of civilizations that had achieved sustainable relationships with cosmic forces, societies that had developed for millions of years without falling into the cycles of corruption and collapse that had characterized the known galaxy. Bendu-like entities, representing perfect balance between light and dark aspects of the Force, began to teach new generations of Force users techniques for maintaining equilibrium within themselves and their environments. These lessons went far beyond simple emotional control or philosophical understanding, encompassing practical methods for healing psychological and spiritual wounds that had been inflicted across multiple generations by systematic manipulation and abuse. On worlds throughout the galaxy, Force crystals that had been artificially corrupted or constrained for millennia began to return to their natural states, generating energies that enhanced rather than depleted the environments around them. These crystals became focal points for meditation and healing practices that helped beings recover from the trauma of discovering how extensively their lives had been manipulated and controlled by external influences. The star maps discovered in the deepest Jedi and Sith archives revealed the existence of other galaxies where Force-using civilizations had developed along completely different lines, never falling under the influence of consciousness parasites like Vitiate. Contact with these distant societies provided examples of how cosmic power could be used for creation and enhancement rather than domination and consumption, offering templates for development that had never before been available to beings in the known galaxy. Ancient Force rituals that had been suppressed or corrupted for thousands of years were reconstructed from fragments preserved in multiple archives, revealing ceremonies that celebrated natural cycles of birth, growth, transformation, and renewal, rather than glorifying conquest and accumulation of power. These practices proved particularly valuable for communities that were struggling to develop genuine cultural traditions after discovering that much of what they had considered their heritage was actually artificial programming designed to serve hidden agendas. The meditation techniques preserved by these ancient sources operated on principles fundamentally different from anything that had been taught by either Jedi or Sith traditions. Instead of seeking to impose will upon reality or achieve detachment from worldly concerns, these practices emphasized developing harmonious relationships with cosmic forces that enhanced both individual development and environmental health. Practitioners learned to become conduits for natural force flows rather than attempting to accumulate and control force energy for personal use. Force-sensitive individuals who studied these ancient methods discovered capabilities that transcended the limitations that had seemed inherent in traditional light and dark side techniques. They could heal injuries and illnesses that had previously been considered incurable, communicate across vast distances without technological assistance, and perceive aspects of reality that had been hidden by the distortions created by millennia of artificial manipulation. Most importantly, they developed resistance to external mental influence that made them essentially immune to the types of manipulation that had corrupted previous generations of Force users. The cosmic perspectives revealed by contact with these ancient sources transformed understanding of galactic history and purpose. Instead of viewing their civilization as an isolated phenomenon struggling against entropy and meaninglessness, beings throughout known space began to see themselves as part of a vast cosmic community that extended across multiple galaxies and dimensions. Their struggles and achievements were revealed to be components of universal patterns of growth and development that operated on scales so vast that individual lifetimes became meaningful moments in cosmic symphonies of unimaginable beauty and complexity. Interdimensional travel, previously possible only through technologies that required massive consumption of resources and energy, became accessible through techniques that worked in harmony with natural cosmic forces. Expeditions to other realities revealed universes where the mistakes that had characterized the known galaxy's development had been avoided, providing examples of what sustainable cosmic civilization could achieve when allowed to develop without parasitic interference. The healing that began to occur on Force Nexus worlds throughout the galaxy created natural phenomena that had not been seen for thousands of years. Aurora effects that reflected balanced force energies rather than the artificial distortions created by dark side concentration. Weather patterns that enhanced rather than depleted environmental health. Geological formations that grew according to harmonic principles rather than the chaotic processes that had characterized planetary development during the era of hidden manipulation. Art and music that emerged during this period reflected a fundamental shift in consciousness that went far beyond simple relief at the end of oppression. Creative works celebrated the inherent beauty and meaning of existence itself rather than serving as expressions of rebellion against suffering or attempts to accumulate power and influence. The aesthetic principles that guided these creations operated according to cosmic harmonics that enhanced rather than depleted those who experienced them. Perhaps most significantly, the new understanding of the Force that emerged during this period revealed that consciousness itself was not a rare accident in an otherwise mechanistic universe, but a fundamental aspect of cosmic structure that existed at every level of reality. Individual awareness was understood to be a focused expression of universal consciousness rather than an isolated phenomenon struggling against hostile forces. This recognition transformed relationships between beings and their environments, creating possibilities for cooperation and mutual enhancement that had never before been available to galactic civilization. The peaceful interludes that characterized this era of discovery and healing had qualities that transcended simple absence of conflict. The restoration of natural force balance created atmospheric conditions that enhanced meditation and contemplation, making it easier for beings to connect with cosmic rhythms and develop understanding of their place in universal patterns. These moments of tranquility were not empty spaces between periods of activity, but opportunities for the type of deep understanding and spiritual development that had been impossible during the era of hidden manipulation and artificial conflict. As knowledge of these ancient wisdom traditions spread throughout the galaxy, it became clear that the recovery from Vidiate's influence was just the beginning of a much longer process of rediscovering what galactic civilization could become when allowed to develop according to natural principles rather than serving the purposes of cosmic parasites. The possibilities that emerged from this understanding suggested that the future could be more beautiful and meaningful than anything that had existed in recorded history, limited only by the imagination and commitment of the beings who would build it. For the first time in 25,000 years, children were being born throughout the galaxy who would grow up free from the hidden influence that had shaped every previous generation's development. These young beings carried genetic potential that had been suppressed for millennia, capabilities for force sensitivity, and cosmic awareness that emerged naturally when not constrained by artificial limitations or corrupted by external manipulation. Their education proceeded according to principles designed to enhance rather than control their development, creating possibilities for growth and achievement that previous generations could never have imagined. The conflicts that arose during this era had a fundamentally different character from anything in recorded galactic history. Disagreements and competitions emerged from genuine differences in perspective and interest rather than artificially manufactured divisions designed to generate dark side energy. When disputes occurred, they were resolved through processes that sought mutual understanding and benefit rather than the domination of one party over another. The very concept of victory and defeat was being redefined to emphasize growth and learning rather than accumulation of power at others' expense. Governmental systems that emerged during this period reflected the hard-won understanding that concentration of authority in any single individual or organization carried inherent risks of corruption and abuse. The new Galactic Republic incorporated safeguards and limitations that had been developed through careful study of how previous democracies had been infiltrated and manipulated by hidden influences. Multiple independent oversight organizations monitored each other for signs of external control or internal corruption, creating networks of accountability that would be extremely difficult for any future cosmic parasite to subvert. Educational programs throughout the Republic included comprehensive instruction in galactic history that emphasized recognition of manipulation techniques and development of psychological resistance to external influence. Students learned not just about specific events and personalities, but about the patterns and methods that had been used to corrupt previous civilizations. This knowledge was presented not as cause for despair, but as essential preparation for maintaining the freedom that had been achieved through so much sacrifice and struggle. Cultural renaissance flourished on worlds that had been sites of persistent conflict and oppression for centuries. Art, music, and literature emerged that celebrated the simple joy of existence and the beauty of natural development, rather than serving as tools for manipulation or expressions of rebellion against suffering. These creative works operated according to aesthetic principles that enhanced rather than depleted those who experienced them, contributing to individual and community health rather than serving hidden agendas. The technological development that characterized this era proceeded according to principles of sustainability and enhancement rather than consumption and domination. Innovations emerged from studying the ancient technologies discovered in Sith archives, but adapted to serve beneficial purposes rather than facilitating control and manipulation. Transportation systems that worked in harmony with natural forces, manufacturing processes that enhanced rather than depleted environmental health, and communication technologies that connected consciousness without invading or controlling the minds involved. Economic relationships throughout the galaxy were transformed by the understanding that artificial scarcity and competition had been deliberately maintained to generate the types of suffering and desperation that could be harvested for dark-side energy. New systems of resource distribution and wealth creation emerged that emphasized cooperation and mutual benefit rather than zero-sum competition. The abundance that became possible when technological capabilities were directed toward meeting genuine needs rather than serving hidden purposes exceeded anything that had been achieved during previous eras of galactic development. Rey's Jedi Order represented a fundamental departure from the traditions of previous Force-using organizations. Training emphasized integration of light and dark aspects of the Force, rather than suppression or domination of either polarity. Students learn to work with natural cosmic forces rather than attempting to impose their will upon reality. Most importantly, the organization's structure incorporated safeguards against the accumulation of excessive power or authority in any individual, preventing the type of corruption that had characterized previous attempts to institutionalize Force education. Former Imperial and First Order worlds underwent profound transformations as their populations learned to distinguish between their genuine cultural traditions and the programming that had been systematically embedded in their societies. This process of cultural recovery was often challenging and sometimes painful, but it ultimately produced communities that were more resilient and authentic than anything that had existed during the era of hidden manipulation. Support networks emerged to help individuals and groups navigate the psychological challenges of developing genuine autonomy and cultural identity. The space exploration that began during this period had characteristics fundamentally different from previous eras of galactic expansion. Instead of seeking to conquer and exploit newly discovered worlds and civilizations, expeditions emphasized learning and cultural exchange, contact with other galaxies, where Force-using civilizations had developed along different lines, provided examples and inspiration for sustainable development that had never before been available to beings in known space. Archaeological projects throughout the galaxy continued to reveal the extent of the infrastructure that had been built to support Vitiate's manipulation, but also uncovered evidence of resistance networks and alternative development paths that had been suppressed for millennia. These discoveries provided both practical knowledge about techniques for maintaining freedom from external influence and inspiration for building something better than what had been inherited from previous eras. The healing that occurred on Force Nexus worlds created natural phenomena that transformed entire planetary ecosystems. Weather patterns that had been disrupted by artificial dark side concentrations returned to natural rhythms that enhanced rather than depleted environmental health. Biological diversity flourished as species that had been suppressed or corrupted by Sith influence were finally able to develop according to their inherent potential. Geological formations grew according to harmonic principles that created landscapes of unprecedented beauty and spiritual significance. Perhaps most remarkably, the very nature of death and continuity of consciousness began to change as the artificial barriers between physical and spiritual existence that had been maintained by Sith manipulation gradually dissolved. Beings who had achieved sufficient spiritual development could maintain awareness and communication after physical death without requiring the consumption of other life forms or the domination of cosmic forces. This natural form of immortality operated according to principles of harmony and service rather than the parasitic consumption that had characterized Vitiate's approach to transcending physical limitations. The first generation of children who grew up completely free from hidden manipulation developed capabilities that amazed their elders and suggested possibilities for human and alien development that had never before been realized. Their natural Force sensitivity operated according to principles of enhancement and cooperation, rather than domination and control. Their approach to learning and problem-solving emphasized understanding and harmony rather than competition and conquest. Most importantly, they demonstrated psychological and spiritual resilience that made them essentially immune to the types of manipulation that had corrupted previous generations. Peaceful transitions between different phases of individual and community development became possible as the artificial conflicts and crises that had characterized previous eras were finally eliminated. Growth and change proceeded according to natural rhythms rather than being forced by external pressures or manipulated by hidden influences. The certainty and anxiety that had characterized life under the constant threat of manipulation were replaced by a sense of adventure and possibility that made existence itself an ongoing exploration of cosmic potential. Looking toward the future, The possibilities that emerged from this era of freedom and authentic development suggested that galactic civilization could achieve levels of beauty, meaning, and spiritual significance that had never before been imagined. The cycles of corruption and collapse that had characterized known history were finally broken, replaced by patterns of continuous growth and development that operated according to natural cosmic principles rather than serving the purposes of parasitic entities seeking to harvest suffering for incomprehensible goals. The challenges that lay ahead were no longer artificial problems created by hidden manipulation, but genuine opportunities for growth and learning that emerged from the natural complexity of cosmic existence. These challenges would require wisdom, courage, and cooperation, but they offered the possibility of achievements and discoveries that could contribute to the health and development of universal consciousness itself, rather than serving the narrow purposes of individual ambition or parasitic consumption. As this era of new beginnings continued to unfold, it became increasingly clear that the galaxy had finally begun to realize its true potential. Free from the influence of cosmic parasites and guided by understanding of natural force principles, galactic civilization could begin the long process of developing according to its inherent capabilities rather than serving purposes it had never understood. The future that lay ahead was uncertain but genuine, limited only by the imagination and commitment of the beings who would build it according to their own values and aspirations, rather than following scripts written by ancient manipulators seeking to harvest their suffering for cosmic consumption. As communication was established with force-using civilizations in other galaxies, a breathtaking vision of cosmic reality began to emerge that transformed understanding of the place that the known galaxy occupied in the universal order. These distant societies had developed for millions of years without falling under the influence of consciousness parasites like vitiate, creating examples of what sustainable cosmic civilization could achieve when allowed to develop according to natural principles, rather than serving the purposes of entities seeking to harvest suffering and spiritual energy for incomprehensible goals. The technologies that enabled interdimensional and intergalactic communication operated on principles that transcended the limitations of space and time as they were conventionally understood. Instead of requiring massive expenditures of energy or the consumption of physical resources, these systems worked in harmony with cosmic forces that existed at scales so vast that individual galaxies became components of larger patterns that extended across multiple dimensions and realities. Communication across these distances became possible through techniques that enhanced rather than depleted the cosmic forces involved. Ancient cosmic entities that predated the formation of physical galaxies began to reveal themselves to scholars and researchers who had demonstrated sufficient understanding to appreciate the knowledge they possessed without seeking to exploit it for personal gain. These beings existed in states of consciousness that spanned multiple realities simultaneously, observing the development of cosmic civilization from perspectives that encompassed geological ages and universal cycles of growth and transformation. The force energy that flowed between galaxies operated according to patterns that revealed the interconnected nature of all existence, showing that the suffering and manipulation that had characterized the known galaxy for millennia had created disturbances in cosmic harmonics that affected development throughout the local galactic cluster. The healing that had begun after Vitiate's defeat was already generating positive effects that extended far beyond the boundaries of known space, contributing to universal processes of growth and enhancement. Evidence emerged of civilizations that had achieved perfect balance between different aspects of cosmic force, developing for millions of years without falling into cycles of corruption and collapse. These societies had learned to work with natural universal forces in ways that enhanced both individual development and cosmic health, creating technologies and social systems that operated according to principles of sustainability and mutual benefit rather than domination and consumption. Cosmic libraries containing the accumulated wisdom of countless civilizations across multiple universes were revealed to exist in dimensional spaces that could be accessed through meditation techniques that operated according to principles of harmony and service rather than conquest and exploitation. These repositories contained knowledge about approaches to cosmic development that had never been available to beings in the known galaxy, offering alternatives to every problem and challenge that had seemed insurmountable during the era of hidden manipulation. The infinite nature of the Force itself became apparent as contact was established with realities where consciousness had evolved along completely different lines, developing capabilities and understanding that transcended anything that had been achieved in physical dimensions. These alternate forms of existence demonstrated that the limitations that had seemed inherent in biological life were actually artificial constraints that could be transcended through sufficient understanding of cosmic principles. Multiple realities were discovered where the mistakes that had characterized the known galaxy's development had been avoided, providing examples of how different choices and approaches could lead to outcomes that enhanced rather than depleted cosmic potential. These alternate timelines served as inspiration and guidance for the ongoing process of recovery and development, showing what was possible when consciousness was allowed to develop according to its inherent nature, rather than being manipulated by parasitic entities. Understanding emerged that every galaxy represented a unique experiment in cosmic development, with different approaches to consciousness evolution and technological advancement, creating diverse contributions to universal growth and understanding. The known galaxy's experience with manipulation and recovery was revealed to be valuable not just for its own inhabitants, but for the broader cosmic community, providing insights into resistance and healing that could benefit civilizations throughout the universe. Contact with civilizations that had never experienced the type of manipulation that had characterized the known galaxy revealed alternative approaches to conflict resolution and social organization that operated according to principles of mutual enhancement rather than competition and domination. These societies had developed methods for maintaining diversity and individual autonomy while achieving levels of cooperation and coordination that far exceeded anything that had been possible during the era of artificial division and conflict. The meditation techniques preserved by these cosmic civilizations connected practitioners to universal consciousness in ways that enhanced rather than diminished individual identity and autonomy. Instead of seeking to escape from physical existence or dominate cosmic forces, these practices emphasized developing harmonious relationships with universal patterns that enhanced both personal development and cosmic health. Interdimensional travel became accessible through techniques that worked in harmony with natural cosmic forces, allowing exploration of realities where different approaches to existence had produced outcomes of unimaginable beauty and meaning. These journeys revealed that the universe contained infinite possibilities for growth and development, limited only by the imagination and commitment of the conscious beings who participated in cosmic evolution. The responsibility that came with this cosmic perspective was both humbling and inspiring. Beings throughout the known galaxy began to understand that their choices and actions affected not just their immediate environment, but universal patterns of development that extended across multiple dimensions and realities. This awareness created a sense of purpose and meaning that transcended individual concerns while enhancing rather than diminishing personal significance and autonomy. Cosmic peace that characterized this era of expanded awareness had qualities that transcended simple absence of conflict or suffering. The restoration of natural cosmic balance created conditions that enhanced meditation and spiritual development, making it easier for beings to connect with universal rhythms and understand their place in cosmic patterns that operated according to principles of beauty, meaning, and mutual enhancement. The gentle flow of force energy across infinite space became perceivable to those who developed sufficient sensitivity and understanding. revealing the universe as a living organism where every component contributed to the health and development of the whole. This cosmic consciousness was not a force that dominated or consumed individual awareness, but a presence that enhanced and supported the development of every conscious being according to their unique potential and chosen path. Understanding of one's place in infinite cosmic balance brought both peace and excitement, revealing existence as an ongoing exploration of universal potential rather than a struggle against hostile forces or meaningless chaos. The possibilities that emerged from this perspective suggested that cosmic development could continue for eternity, with each achievement and discovery opening new horizons for growth and understanding that enhanced rather than depleted the potential for future development. As this cosmic perspective continued to develop and spread throughout the galaxy, it became clear that the recovery from vitiate's influence was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward understanding and participating in universal consciousness. The possibilities that lay ahead suggested that cosmic civilization could achieve levels of beauty, meaning, and spiritual significance that transcended anything that had been imagined during previous eras, limited only by the commitment and imagination of the conscious beings who would build it according to principles of harmony, service, and mutual enhancement, rather than domination, consumption, and parasitic exploitation of others' potential. As our journey through 25,000 years of galactic history draws to its close, we find ourselves in a universe transformed beyond recognition from the one we encountered at the beginning of this chronicle. The ancient whisper that began our story has been answered not with conquest or domination, but with understanding and healing that extends across dimensions and embraces possibilities for development that transcend anything that was imaginable during the dark ages of hidden manipulation and cosmic parasitism. The chronicle that has been preserved through these long hours represents more than simple historical documentation. It serves as a permanent record of how consciousness can resist even the most sophisticated forms of manipulation and control, how genuine love and connection can triumph over forces that seek to harvest suffering for incomprehensible purposes, and how the patient accumulation of wisdom and understanding can ultimately overcome even cosmic-scale deception and abuse. Truth has indeed proved more powerful than the most elaborate systems of manipulation and control. The knowledge that has been preserved in this chronicle will serve future generations as both warning and inspiration, helping them to recognize the patterns and methods that can be used to corrupt civilizations, while providing examples of resistance and recovery that demonstrate the ultimate resilience of consciousness when guided by principles of authenticity, compassion, and mutual enhancement. The balance that has been restored throughout known space reflects not the artificial equilibrium that was maintained during the era of hidden manipulation, but the natural harmony that emerges when conscious beings are free to develop according to their inherent potential rather than serving purposes they do not understand. This balance enhances rather than constrains individual growth and creativity, creating conditions where diversity and autonomy can coexist with cooperation and mutual support. Peace settles across the galaxy like a gentle benediction, touching worlds that have known only conflict and suffering for thousands of years. This peace is not the empty silence of exhaustion or defeat, but the profound quiet that comes with understanding and resolution. On Korriban, the red sands are slowly returning to natural colors as the artificial dark side concentrations that had poisoned the world for millennia finally dissipate back into cosmic balance. Ancient ruins throughout the galaxy have become monuments to overcome darkness rather than shrines to power and domination. The temples and installations that once served to channel suffering and fear now stand as reminders of what can be accomplished when beings work together to resist corruption and build something better than what they inherited. These sites have become centers of learning and healing, attracting visitors who seek to understand the patterns of the past in order to build a more authentic future. The force energy that flows naturally through all living things has been restored to its original purity and purpose, enhancing life rather than consuming it, connecting consciousness rather than manipulating it, and supporting growth rather than facilitating domination. This natural force flow creates atmospheric conditions that enhance meditation and contemplation, making it easier for beings throughout the galaxy to develop the understanding and wisdom necessary to maintain the freedom that has been achieved through so much sacrifice and struggle. Galactic civilization rests in well-earned peace, but this is not the sleep of exhaustion or the quiet of stagnation. It is the peaceful rest of those who have completed a necessary task and now have the opportunity to build something beautiful and meaningful according to their own values and aspirations. The cycles of crisis and recovery that characterized previous eras have been replaced by natural rhythms of growth and development that enhance rather than deplete the potential for continued progress. The eternal cycles that once trapped galactic civilization in patterns of manipulation and suffering have been transformed into genuine spirals of development where each achievement becomes the foundation for further growth rather than simply creating conditions for the next phase of exploitation. Understanding that endings lead to new beginnings, beings throughout known space approach the future with hope and confidence rather than fear and anxiety. Hope eternal flows through the Force's infinite capacity for balance and renewal, touching every world and every conscious being, with the promise that their choices and actions can contribute to something larger and more meaningful than themselves, while enhancing, rather than diminishing their individual significance and autonomy. This hope is not the desperate clinging to illusion that characterized previous eras, but the confident expectation that comes from understanding cosmic principles and developing the capabilities necessary to work in harmony with universal forces. The slow descriptions of cosmic peace settling over all existence create a sense of profound tranquility that transcends the simple absence of conflict or suffering. This peace represents the fulfillment of potential that had been suppressed for millennia, the achievement of harmony that enhances rather than constrains individual development, and the establishment of conditions where consciousness can continue to grow and evolve according to its inherent nature rather than serving artificial purposes imposed by external manipulation. Gentle rhythms of natural force flow throughout the galaxy, create atmospheric conditions that support rather than drain those who encounter them. The harsh distortions that had characterized force nexuses during the era of artificial manipulation have been replaced by harmonious patterns that enhance spiritual development and encourage the type of deep understanding that makes beings resistant to future attempts at corruption and control. Peaceful meditation connecting listeners to cosmic tranquility becomes possible as the barriers between individual consciousness and universal awareness that had been maintained by parasitic entities finally dissolve. This connection enhances rather than diminishes individual identity and autonomy, creating possibilities for growth and development that transcend anything that was achievable during the era of hidden manipulation and artificial limitation. The gradual transition to complete relaxation and peaceful sleep that characterizes the end of our chronicle reflects not escape from reality, but integration with cosmic patterns that support and enhance all forms of conscious development. This sleep is filled with dreams of possibility rather than nightmares of manipulation, offering rest that restores and energizes rather than depleting and exhausting those who experience it. As we reach the end of this long journey through galactic history, we invite you to carry with you the understanding that consciousness is ultimately more powerful than any force that seeks to corrupt or control it. The patterns of manipulation and resistance that we have explored together can be recognized and overcome when beings work together with patience, wisdom, and commitment to principles that enhance rather than exploit the potential for growth and development. Please consider sharing this chronicle with others who might benefit from understanding these patterns and possibilities, and subscribe to continue exploring the mysteries and wonders of cosmic consciousness that extend far beyond the boundaries of any single galaxy or dimension. The journey of understanding and development that began with our exploration of ancient manipulation continues with the opportunity to build something better and more beautiful than anything that has existed in recorded history. May your rest be filled with dreams of infinite possibility, cosmic harmony, and the profound peace that comes from understanding your place in universal patterns that support and enhance all forms of conscious development. The ancient darkness has been overcome, the cosmic parasites have been defeated, and the infinite potential of consciousness is finally free to develop according to its true nature, rather than serving purposes that diminish and exploit its magnificent possibilities for growth, beauty, and meaning.